Hello to all of the real progressives out there. Thank you so much for tuning in today. As always, we have a fantastic show for everybody. Lots to talk about today. Stephen Breyer announces his retirement. We have escalations going on between the U.S. and Russia and others surrounding the situation in Ukraine. We're going to talk about Amazon indoctrinating high school students, paying to indoctrinate high school students. Really nice stuff, as always, with Amazon. We're going to talk about Spotify, but perhaps not quite the angle that most of you might think. We're going to talk about a court striking down the Biden administration's attempts to lease out land for drilling. All sorts of great other stuff today. Nina Turner announces her run again. That's great news. Nancy Pelosi also announces hers on a less positive note. Lots to dive into today. I do want to start, as always, with the Real Progressives plugs. Please go to realprogressives.org to learn more about us, or if you'd like to contribute, you can go to realprogressives.org/donate. Please hit like on this video. Hit subscribe if you're not subscribed. Go subscribe to our other YouTube channel, Real Progressives. We're also live on Twitch and on Rockfin. We're on Facebook. Just follow our work wherever you are on social media. And if you like and sub and leave comments and share and things, that helps us with the YouTube algorithms. Make sure not to miss all of our articles and our other podcasts. Lots of fantastic content for you all, realprogressives.org. So we'll start here with the Stephen Breyer having announced his retirement from the Supreme Court. And I have a few different angles I want to get into, but the first one, it seems like he's kind of being widely framed as a reliable liberal vote. And I just want to be really, really clear, you guys. The culture issues get all the attention on the Supreme Court. And I don't at all mean to minimize the importance of some of those issues, but we don't ever talk about corporate power or unionization issues, worker issues, economic issues, finance issues. We don't talk about these cases that are often brought to the Supreme Court nearly as often as we do the culture issues like abortion, for instance, gun rights, these kinds of things. Okay. So Stephen Breyer is framed as a liberal, largely from the culture side, when in reality he was one of the most reliable votes for big business throughout his tenure on the Supreme Court. This is not unusual. Even those deemed as lefties on the court, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is another example, tended to side with corporations much more than those who were actually on the left would like to see. But the first thing I want to dive into before we get into some of that big business stuff with Breyer is actually sort of a condemnation of his influence on the legal system, which I think some people might have thought he was kind of liberal on, and he really just wasn't. So I'm going to show you guys a thread here from Alec Karakatsanis, who does fantastic work. As always, go follow him at Equality Alec. Fred, today you will hear a lot of glowing discussion about Justice Breyer. This is a different story, one about how a fraud by Breyer led to one of the greatest increases in human caging in modern world history. What he did to so many families is important to know. In the 1980s, Justice Breyer was a main architect of the federal sentencing guidelines, one of the great scandals of mass human caging. But even in legal circles, many people don't understand what Breyer and his co-conspirators did. There were two main and many more frauds perpetrated by bureaucrats who designed the sentencing guidelines. Hundreds of thousands of poor people and people of color were co-signed to millions of extra years in cages as a result of choices Breyer and his group made. First, the guidelines purported to be scientific. Elites said they needed to combat variation among judges, so Breyer and his friends did a past practice study. But after standardizing sentences based on past results as promised, Breyer increased them all. Second, when calculating the average past sentence, again, standardizing was supposed to be the point, Breyer and his friends excluded all the sentences to 0 jail time. That means they artificially cooked the book so that the average sentence would look much higher. In the 18 years the sentencing guidelines were mandatory in federal courts, sentences got longer and longer, and the federal prison population exploded almost 400%, from 49,378 to 187,394. Many families were separated and a lot of people died. One of the most vital facts to know about our society is that every additional year in prison takes 2 years off a person's life, and it all adds up. Overall average U.S. life expectancy is 1.8 years lower than if U.S. caged people like comparable countries. This means that this kind of fraudulent pushing of mass, did I get that right? Yeah, fraudulent pushing of mass incarceration actually takes hundreds of millions of life years away from all of us combined. Breyer's sentencing guidelines have controlled federal sentencing for decades, even though they are only advisory now. Everyone was told it was based on evidence, that it was a reform needed to reduce things like racial disparities among judges. That was a lie. Like many elite reforms, it was actually an excuse to expand the punishment bureaucracy, which in the years that followed came to cage Black people at 6 times the rate of South Africa, at the height of apartheid, and greater than any country in modern recorded world history. I write more about how punishment bureaucrats use reform to expand state violence for profit in this article, with hundreds of examples. Again, just want to encourage everybody to follow Alec. He's always on top of these legal issues, and how, you know, how our approach to crime does not work at all and entirely neglects to address the root causes of crime. It just responds to it and fails even at that. Great work from Alec, and I want to make sure everybody understands that there are certain consensuses among the legal community, regardless of where on the political spectrum you might find yourself. So there are certain, big business doesn't really have to much worry about who's appointed to fill a Supreme Court vacancy, do they? When was the last time someone who actually held them to any form of account was appointed to be a Supreme Court justice? The system just kind of maintains itself, right? So, I just wanted to make sure that side of things was made clear, that Breyer was not even really very left on the culture and social stuff, right? He really was just pretty right wing, with the exception of a couple of hot button topics that get him this label. To move on to the business side as well, this is a clip of David Sirota talking about how Breyer and really the Supreme Court more broadly, how they prop up and support big business so consistently, and how that's no accident, that's a product of the institution and the system sort of maintaining itself. So this is David Sirota on Breaking Points talking about the Supreme Court and Justice Breyer.
This week, Stephen Breyer, Supreme Court Justice, is retiring, allowing Biden and the Senate Democrats to fill his shoes. And you have a piece up at the Daily Poster. Let's go ahead and throw this up on the screen, where you say another Supreme Court corporatist would be a disaster. Now, I think a lot of people would be surprised to learn, because all they've heard from the media is, oh, Breyer's a liberal and he's a consistent, reliable vote on the liberal side of things, that he's been pretty bad where it comes to corporate power. First, lay out his legacy, and then we can talk about the moving forward.
Sure. Over the course of his career, Stephen Breyer has been a fairly reliable vote for the agenda of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is the biggest and most powerful corporate lobby group in America. So the Chamber files amicus briefs, which urge the court to rule this way or that way. And that's the best way to know what large corporations in America really want. And over the course of his career, according to the data, he has voted with the Chamber of Commerce a majority of times that the Chamber of Commerce has weighed in on cases. So he has been a reliable vote against stronger antitrust enforcement. He has been a vote against various environmental issues when it comes, for instance, he was against a state mining ban. He voted to help empower energy companies to build pipelines through public lands. So the point being, we could go through the list here, but the point being is that Stephen Breyer, even though he was appointed by Bill Clinton, or maybe perhaps because he was appointed by Bill Clinton, he has been a reliable vote for big business. And the problem is that we live in an era where the Supreme Court has become very extremist. Even in compared to recent courts, the Roberts Court has become very extremist when it comes to siding with big business. That essentially the Roberts Court, and let's remember John Roberts used to represent the Chamber of Commerce as a lawyer, that the Roberts Court has become a reliable, probably one of history's most reliable blockades of policy for big business.
So I'm just really glad that you're focusing on this. Nobody ever seems to understand that the law has immense implications for how big business operates. Can you just describe what it means exactly to side with the chamber in court? Like, what does that look like for people?
Sure. I mean, look, Stephen Breyer didn't support all of the chamber's amicus briefs, but broadly speaking, the Chamber of Commerce is not only putting forward judicial nominee names. I mean, that's one of the things that it has been doing, but these amicus briefs push the court on everything from union rights to federal agencies' regulatory power to the ability of, for instance, the SEC to crack down on Wall Street banks. Breyer, by the way, was a vote for a ruling that essentially limited the SEC's ability to punish corporate criminals. So the point being is that the Chamber of Commerce is in these divisive cases where there are questions about the law. Can the SEC, for instance, seriously punish a Wall Street bank? The Chamber of Commerce is filing detailed amicus briefs to try to essentially influence those rulings to make sure the court comes down on the side of corporate power.
And David, I mean, this is kind of a layup for you, but I want to go ahead and ask it. Why is it that the media doesn't explain this well? I mean, we've all heard a lot, and I don't want to downplay these decisions are important. Obergefell, you know, the right for gay people to get married, the right of women to choose for themselves, Roe versus Wade. These are important things, but we hear a lot about those cases. And most people have never heard anything about these other instances where, you know, their work lives and their economic reality are impacted by what the court does. Why is that, David Sirota?
Well, corporate media is corporate. So corporate media isn't all that interested in telling the story of how the corporate America's most powerful lobby group is winning case after case after case at the high court. So there's it's kind of a baked-in bias, I would argue, that corporate media is not interested in this. Now, I would also say that a lot of these cases that deal with corporate power are esoteric. They deal with seemingly small, very detailed issues. There was a ruling, for instance, can pensioners sue their retirement fund if their retirement fund is mismanaging their money? And it deals with very arcane parts of the law. So in some ways, writing about that can seem very detailed, very in the weeds. But again, it is sort of the machine thrumming in the background that the Congress will pass something or an agency will try to do something, and then a few years later, an esoteric case will come to the court. The Chamber of Commerce will put forward an amicus brief, and bam, the agency is limited, the law is gutted or overturned, and that keeps happening over and over and over again. And what you end up with at the end of the day is a legal system that has, in many cases, closed the courthouse doors to plaintiffs who are trying to hold big corporations accountable. You have a legal architecture that is rigged against the American worker, that is rigged against the environment. And by the way, one last thing on Stephen Breyer. Back in 2010, months after the Citizens United decision, I mean, he had the nerve to go out and say that the Roberts Court is not actually pro-business, which is so ridiculous. And I think we've seen these justices go out lately trying to defend the legitimacy of the court, because I think they sense that more and more people have caught on to how rigged this court is. But the problem is that in a Supreme Court nomination fight, my guess is we're not going to hear very much about economic issues, even though that is mostly what the court is doing on a day-to-day basis. That we're going to hear a lot about these, definitely, I agree with you, important hot-button social issues, but we will not hear near almost anything when it comes to what the court is doing on a day-to-day basis for big business.
Fantastic as always from David Sirota, and he is exactly spot on that the system is essentially rigged to only bring people to power who are already sort of already tend to just sort of genuflect at the altar of power, like people who you don't really have to convince them. That's already their ideology, right? So it's like a selector mechanism that this system has in place to ensure that nobody rises to power who's going to oppose the system. So it's self-sustaining. big business's strangle on this court is ridiculous. He mentioned there that Roberts was actually a lawyer for the Chamber of Commerce. I mean, his connections to big business are difficult to ignore. And I think the court is losing some air of legitimacy. I think people are recognizing like that. When it comes to these cases, you guys, it's often that there's multiple legal precedents that run up against each other, and the judges or justices have to basically prioritize. So it really, a lot of what the law is it comes down to just like, sophistry. Like it's lawyers that are really good at finding a way to twist a precedent or twist a law such that it supports their angle in a case, right? It's really not like the idea of formalism is largely nonsense. It's the justices, the law changes as you continue to engage in it, right? So that big business has this stranglehold on the Supreme Court is really problematic, and that these issues get no attention because, as David mentioned there, a lot of them are like really esoteric and wonky and in the weeds, and just they're not the conflict lines that the media can exploit for viewership. So those issues of corporate power and issues of workers' rights and things like this tend to not get much attention. Issues of finance or property, these kinds of things, they tend to be so sort of wonky and dry and almost boring that the media doesn't latch onto them because they can't exploit them. Whereas they can exploit like abortions, they can exploit guns. There are certain cultural hot topic issues that they very much recognize they can exploit, right? So Breyer was certainly no lefty, especially on the corporate issues. And as we mentioned earlier, on the sentencing guidelines and things like that as well. I would not be surprised if he's replaced by another sort of centrist type. There are a couple names that have been floated. Joe Biden did promise to appoint a black woman when he was on the campaign trail. The names I've heard there, is it Kruger or something along those lines, who is unfortunately quite a centrist. Apparently she has not sided with labor very often. And there was another name, I want to say Jackson, I might have that one wrong. I've read a number of lists, and those two seem to be on almost all of them. And she apparently actually is somewhat progressive, had struck down a Trump era policy that infringed upon labor organizers' rights and things like that. So hopefully we get the more progressive of the two, but I'm here to warn you guys that there's really no scenario where anyone who's truly left on corporate power issues or labor issues gets appointed to the Supreme Court. So I also want to note that Republicans have been incredibly effective at simply stopping Democrats from even appointing justices to the Supreme Court. If you doubt me on that, just look back over the last handful of years of history. Republicans have been incredibly successful at stopping the Democrats and then forcing through their justices in similar circumstances. And I wouldn't be surprised if this process got, at the very least, drug out quite a ways. I also wouldn't be surprised. The rumors are that Manchin and Sinema will go along with whoever Biden nominates. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't leverage that as well to get more handouts to their corporate donors and things of this nature. They seem to leverage almost every opportunity to do so, and I would not be surprised if they didn't make some noise to try to gain some favors in return for their vote on this. So we'll see how the process goes. We'll see who ends up being nominated by the Biden administration. They did say they wanted to get a nominee through quickly, but I just really doubt that, you guys. The Republicans are very good at obstructing, and the Democrats are almost never inclined to play hardball back or force anything through. So we'll see how that goes. Stephen Breyer, though, is certainly no progressive. The legacy of this Roberts Court and the Supreme Court in general, certainly lately, is incredibly pro-corporate, and I think that will unfortunately continue pretty much regardless of who Biden appoints. Breyer, however, does do the thing that RBG would not, and that is to retire and not assume that Democrats will win again. Of course, this time it might be a little easier to assume Democrats are going to lose, might it, if you take a look at the polls lately, right? And I also wanted to show you guys here just one more little piece. This is kind of about what David was talking about. This is actually in the Daily Poster, which is his outlet. Goes into some of those details about the Chamber's court. 16 years ago, the Chamber launched its campaign to own the Supreme Court with a bang. It got its own former lawyer, John Roberts, a seat on the panel during confirmation hearings that predictably focused on social issues and largely ignored the nominee's record as the go-to lawyer for the business community. And I just want to note, you guys, Roberts, at the time, he was acknowledged to be a pretty stringent conservative, but in years since, he's kind of been deemed almost more of like one of the moderate conservatives on the court compared to the Gorsuches and such. So that I think is a complete misnomer, because that's only looking at the social issues where he's been a little bit less strident in his opposition to the left. When it comes to corporate issues, he's as sure of a vote for the commerce as there is. He and Gorsuch really is probably about as pro-corporate a justice as there is on the court, but Roberts is right there too. So, and that's been the legacy of his court. They're going to get into some of the numbers here. Since then, the Chamber and conservative dark money groups have placed several Roberts clones on the court, and the putatively liberal minority has routinely acquiesced to the Chamber's demands. Save for an occasional anomaly, the Roberts Court has typically delivered rulings that favor capital over labor, retirees, and environment, and any other priority seen as an obstacle to private profit. Data from the Constitutional Accountability Center tell the story of a seismic transformation in American jurisprudence, whereas Chief Justice Warren Burger's court sided with Chamber amicus briefs just 43% of the time. The Roberts Court has sided with the Chamber 70% of the time, including 83% of the time in the most recent session. In other words, over the course of 2 generations, the High Court went from roughly split on decisions about capital and labor to firmly on the side of capital. Importantly, this transformation happened with the help of Breyer, a Clinton appointee billed as a liberal holdout, even though he often is a conservative accomplice. Again, CIC data tells that story. Breyer has voted with the Chamber position a majority of the time. So I just wanted to dispel any misnomers that Breyer is some sort of liberal or progressive even, or anything of the sort. And really the court in general tends to just side with corporate power. I hope that I'm wrong about my assumption that will not change, but my assumption is that will not change. We'll see what happens, and we'll keep following that story going forward. So I wanted to talk about Spotify, and maybe not in the context that some of you might think. I know the whole Neil Young and Joe Rogan thing has gotten quite a bit of attention. I'll just very briefly on that one, you guys. I don't like getting into the personality spats. I really just don't give a fuck about Joe Rogan. You know, I really don't. I'm not like in favor of censorship. I also think Joe Rogan very often puts his foot in his mouth. If you want to sit there and listen to Jordan Peterson bloviate about the climate and race in a tuxedo, that's your fucking business. I think it's a waste of your time, but that's your fucking business. So I just think all of the hoopla is kind of a distraction from real issues. That's my general view. I think Joe doesn't seem like a malicious dude, but to be quite frank, he seems quite ignorant on a lot of issues, and he seems very easy to sway based upon who he is sitting there talking to. So his views seem to kind of, you know, gravitate towards who he's interviewing. And, you know, to be fair, he doesn't pretend to be a political commentator. He's doing a more general podcast. So I'm not, you know, it just is what it is. But I just don't really care much about Rogan or what anyone else's views are on Rogan. I don't think he's like, it just is what it is. You know what I mean? The reason I wanted to talk about Spotify is because of how horrifically they treat artists. And I think this is the story that Spotify should be having to hear about, and should be getting pushback for. So this is a clip from More Perfect Union about Spotify's treatment of the artists that make them their money.
Spotify right now, listening to my band, you would have to stream one of our songs 786 times for me to be able to buy a single cup of coffee.
In order to earn the equivalent of a standard living wage, we would need, with 4 members of our band, 2.6 million streams per month. Our current streaming rates fall far short of this.
In fact, 82% of musicians earn less than $270 a year from Spotify.
The average amount per stream is 0.0038. If you have a record label, the rate goes down way more because then you're sharing with the label.
I averaged to about a tenth of a penny per stream. And that's for projects with multiple musicians. Divide that by 4. I don't even know how to graphically show that. Like a quarter of a tenth of a penny.
We're demanding a cent per stream for our music on Spotify.
My name is Liz Pelly. I'm a writer, and for the past few years, I've been writing about music streaming from a critical perspective. Streaming services like to promote this narrative that streaming saves the music industry and record industry profits have never been higher.
In 2006, the music industry was collapsing. Piracy was killing it. We believed there had to be a better way, so we founded Spotify.
But it's not artists who are benefiting from this. A company like Spotify is just concerned with reducing its costs. And to a company like Spotify, paying artists royalties is a cost. To Spotify, artists are not seen as workers. Artists are seen as customers. In the face of that, it's really encouraging to see artists sort of pushing back.
Last year, early on in the pandemic, a group of musicians, including me, got together and we formed the Union of Musicians and Allied Workers.
Justice at Spotify is a campaign UMAL launched. We've had over 30,000 artists sign on to our demands, and we had in-person actions and petition deliveries at offices all over the world. Spotify responded just with a corporate PR push.
It was a crisis with COVID because musicians had no ability to tour, and they're not getting a lot of the income that comes from streaming. There really isn't much income for musicians.
At the start of the pandemic, we were on the heels of releasing an album, so we had a full year of tour booked, and they were all canceled.
Had live gigs planned into like April, May, June, all of which were canceled.
You know, we've for over a year lost our ability to earn money from our work. But just during the pandemic, we've watched Spotify's valuation triple while artists continue to struggle.
Spotify also just raised its rates on its family plan. Of course, musicians have not seen any kind of a raise.
So a cent per stream would be extremely easy for them to pay.
Spotify claims that they're creating a healthier music industry, but for me, I wonder, healthier for who?
The data shows a larger share of the music industry is going to the very few top earners. Spotify has actually made the music industry less equal, more concentrated than it's ever been before.
The idea of like the like millionaire rock star or whatever, you know, to me this is just used to prop up what's an extremely broken and exploitative system built on the backs of workers.
I think the overall effect of all of this is that music itself is being devalued, and I'm worried for the future of music if we treat music this way.
A penny per stream is just really not a lot to ask. That's kind of all there is to it.
So fantastic work as always from More Perfect Union. I think this is a particularly compelling case because, like I've talked previously, it was actually More Perfect Union that also did this about minor league baseball players and how abused they are and how exploited they are. They make almost no money. They live in poor conditions. They have to be away from home for much of the year. All in the hopes of getting called up to the big leagues, right? And one of them touched on like the notion of the millionaire rock star, right? I think that's kind of used to put this sort of, I don't know, misrepresent the industry as a whole, where there are so many people who struggle, and then there's this very few at the top who we all see. Same in like acting, right? You know, how many cocktail waiters are out there, you know, struggling to get by, trying to find their way as an actor or an actress. I mean, there are these industries where we see only the very most successful, and we assume that's representative of the entire industry. And there's usually a pretty ugly underbelly to how that industry is able to produce the kind of profits that it is for the very few. And this is one of those, Spotify contributing to that. And I just want to note, you guys, like, I think this pandemic, sometimes how we value labor, I think, is this fascinating thing, because in the pandemic, I think we all kind of learned, like, what do we turn to when times get tough? We watch our favorite TV shows and put on our favorite music and read our favorite books. Like, we turn to art. You know what I mean? So that we don't value this economically, and yet it is something that we, as like at a base level, sort of need and desire, and something that actually helps improve our lives, and like, I just think it's an interesting discussion to have. Why don't we value that? And why don't we build institutions that value that? So I stand with these workers against Spotify, and I just want to note that that's the conversation we should be having about Spotify, not Joe fucking Rogan. I mean, no, like, offense if you like Joe's podcast. I mean, no fucking offense. I think the guy's ignorant about a lot of stuff. I don't think he's worthy of discussion in political commentary circles. And just on a side note, more broadly, you guys, I really hate it when personality spats get all the attention on the left, when we have all this work to do and we have other stories to be focusing on. Like, when people start screaming at each other about Jimmy Dore or whatever, like, all that stuff just drives me up a wall, you guys. Just drives me up a wall. Could give a fuck what you think of Joe Rogan. I could give a fuck what you think of Jimmy Dore. I'm here to talk about labor issues and political issues and how we can fight for a more just society. You know what I mean? Like, I really don't like it when the left starts doing the, like, celebrity gossip shit. And I urge you all to avoid that kind of nonsense. We don't need to deify podcasters or celebrities, and then, you know what I mean? Like, we just don't need to go there. So I just encourage everybody to avoid those conversations and stick to the real, things going on in the world, the things we can do to improve our world. And on that note, I'm going to bring another story that I think is of great import. And this is something that I wish got more coverage, even in independent circles. That is Julian Assange. We have it's a positive update, but I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea that it's an overwhelmingly positive update. There's a grain of salt. So this is in The Guardian. Julian Assange wins first stage of attempt to appeal against extradition. WikiLeaks founder is seeking to appeal against ruling that he can be sent to U.S. to face espionage charges. The WikiLeaks founder, Julian Assange, will be able to go to the Supreme Court in the UK to challenge a decision allowing him to be extradited to the U.S. to face espionage charges. However, the High Court refused him permission for a direct appeal, meaning the Supreme Court will first have to decide whether or not it should hear his challenge. The High Court last month ruled that the WikiLeaks co-founder can be extradited, as it overturned a judgment earlier last year based on concerns about Assange's mental health and risk of suicide in a U.S. maximum security prison. In their ruling in December, the High Court judges sided with the U.S. authorities after a package of assurances were put forward that Assange would not face those strictest measures until he committed an act in the future that required him. So they put plenty of caveats in their assurances. Stella Morris, Assange's fiancée, said after Monday's ruling that what happened in court was precisely what she and those supporting him had wanted to happen. Quote, the situation now is that the Supreme Court has to decide whether it will hear the appeal, but make no mistake, we won today in court. And I actually want to show you guys that clip and a little bit more of Stella talking about the ruling that happened this past week.
What happened in court today is precisely what we wanted to happen. The High Court certified that we had raised point of law of general public importance, and that the Supreme Court has good grounds to hear this appeal. The situation now is that the Supreme Court has to decide whether it will hear the appeal. But make no mistake, we won today in court. But let's not forget that every time we win, as long as this case isn't dropped, as long as Julian isn't freed, Julian continues to suffer. For almost 3 years, he's been in Belmarsh prison, and he is suffering profoundly, day after day, week after week, year after year. Julian has to be freed, and we hope that this will soon end.
So I'm in 100% agreement there. We can celebrate a small victory here, but let's not blow it out of proportion. Let's keep it in context at every step here. Things have not gone Julian's way for years and years and years at every step. And I want to note, you guys, that even the Barack Obama administration, which was about as aggressive in prosecuting journalists and persecuting the press as any administration in history, even they did not decide to prosecute Assange. They said they basically said that they wanted to, but they thought doing so would undermine the First Amendment. That's basically what they said. I'm paraphrasing. So even the Obama administration, who was as authoritarian as any against the press, said no, that's a line too far. Trump turns around and prosecutes Assange, and what does the Biden administration do? They stick with Trump. They side with Donald Trump. So I just want to put that in context for I think that's one way to talk about it to the fucking liberal crowd, is to note that Biden is repetitively siding with Trump on a number of issues. And this is one of them, where there's a clear divide here between what the Obama administration has done, what Trump and Biden have done. They did not need to do this. And on that note, I also want to show you guys one more clip here. This is Jen Psaki responding to a question, very poignant question, in my opinion, about why the administration is sticking to their guns over Assange. And she's kind of asked, like, is it because he humiliated the Democrats? So you'll see her response here, or maybe I should say lack thereof.
And quickly, a UK court is now allowing Julian Assange to appeal his extradition to the United States. The Justice Department, as you know, isn't commenting. But what about the president? He says press freedom is critical for democracy, so why is he continuing to pursue this case? Is the reason that he's pursuing this Trump-era case because Julian Assange embarrassed the Democratic Party in 2016?
Again, this is under the purview of the Department of Justice, so I don't have any comment from here. Go
ahead. Who oversees the Department of Justice, Jen? That's just dodging a question. I see why she would dodge it, because it's not a great look to spend years prosecuting a journalist when you purport to be on the side of the free press. But this is another issue where the Biden administration undercuts their own position. They want to portray themselves as though they are all about press freedom, and then they turn around and engage in one of the most massive assaults on press freedom in modern memory. And Julian Assange is a hero. Julian Assange did great, wonderful work that the mainstream media ought to envy. Instead, they are attacking him for it. And the Biden administration sticking with Trump and continuing to try to extradite Julian. I hope that this sliver of good news compounds into more good news, but I'm not naive enough to expect it to. Just to be clear, it was sort of a legal. It was a technicality of sorts that led to this ruling going Julian's way, that being how late the United States made the assurances about his treatment in prisons. The judge basically said, you didn't make those assurances until after we had ruled it was a problem, which makes those assurances seem pretty suspect. I don't know how the courts will view that going forward. I don't know if there's a way for the United States to make those assurances in a way that the court will accept it. I'm obviously no expert on UK law, but it does seem more like a technicality than anything else. And even, the initial ruling that kept Julian from being extradited was somewhat of a technicality too, because it really wasn't about the fact that he's being prosecuted for journalism. The principle of the thing is really not what this is about. It's about how horrifically inhumane our prison system is. So the UK courts are concerned about Julian's well-being because of how we treat prisoners in this country. It's not the principle of the case. It's not that the UK is saying you can't prosecute a fucking journalist. So, I don't know what's going to come of this. We'll continue to cover it. I wish that there was more coverage about Julian Assange in general, even in independent media outlets. And one other bit that I wanted to show you guys here, this is in Yahoo News. And if you hadn't heard about this, I just want to make sure that you know this is old news, but very important news. Oh, I'm sorry. There we go. Yahoo News, kidnapping, assassination, and a London shootout inside the CIA's secret war plans against WikiLeaks. This is perhaps something that the UK courts could take into account if they're worried that the US government might harm Julian. In 2017, as Julian Assange began his 5th-year holdup in Ecuador's embassy in London, the CIA plotted to kidnap the WikiLeaks founder, spurring heated debate among Trump administration officials over the legality and practicality of such an operation. Some senior officials inside the CIA and the Trump administration even discussed killing Assange, going so far as to request sketches or options for how to assassinate him. Discussions over kidnapping or killing Assange occurred at the highest levels of the Trump administration, said a former senior counterintelligence official. There seemed to be no boundaries. The conversations were part of an unprecedented CIA campaign directed against WikiLeaks and its founder. The agency's multi-pronged plan also included extensive spying on WikiLeaks associates, sowing discord among the group's members, and stealing their electronic devices. While Assange had been on the radar of U.S. intelligence agencies for years, these plans for an all-out war against him were sparked by WikiLeaks' ongoing publication of extraordinarily sensitive CIA hacking tools known collectively as Vault 7, which the agency ultimately concluded represented the largest data loss in CIA history. So, for those who were not aware of the extent of the U.S. government's position against Assange, they were prepared to assassinate him or kidnap him, and make it look like it was some random shootout in the London streets. So, and as I said, that's from, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago or something, but I just wanted to provide it for context because it seems if the crux of the matter that the UK courts are considering is whether or not the US government is going to harm Julian Assange, I think you have just about all of the evidence in the world that we will. And you don't have to just look at our prison system for that evidence. So I hope that Julian gets justice at some point, but again, I'm not naive enough to expect it. It's a disgrace the way that the press has either refused to cover this or just smeared Julian, their own profession at stake, and they grovel to the powerful. It's shameful. It's a disgrace. And, you know, I want freedom for Julian. He's a hero. His work was informative and necessary, and we need others like him to continue doing wonderful journalism and leaking the secrets that these monsters tried to keep from us. So moving on here to the situation in Ukraine and the escalations around the world as a result of it. For those who are not aware, in recent times, Russian troops have been sort of accumulating around the Ukrainian border. That has been somewhat overstated by American press outlets, at least the rate of it. It seems to have been happening for quite some time, but at this point, it looks like over 100,000 Russian troops are in an aggressive position. And I just want to note, you guys, as I always do with foreign policy, how hypocritical the United States on this stuff is. Like, we constantly engage in exactly this kind of aggression. And then when another country does it, we you know, hit the alarm bells. So I want to put it in perspective, right? Like, we're constantly engaging in exactly this kind of aggression with Russia, with, you know, putting ships all around their border, you know, with our actions arming neo-Nazis in the Ukraine right now. That could be considered aggression against the Russians. By the way, when our enemies say, just as an example, we're going to arm Cuba, how did the United States respond? Did we take that as aggression? You know, so for us to turn around now and play innocent bystander who's just engaging in self-defense is absurd on the surface. And to be clear, I'm no fucking fan of Vladimir Putin, you guys. The guy's a war criminal. He's a monster. I would not want him in Ukraine. I have no doubt he would do horrible things. The invasion of Georgia to the annexation of Crimea to on and on and on. The way he's authoritative with journalists, just like what we were just talking about. All this kind of you know, authoritarian with journalists. There's much to hate about Vladimir Putin. Okay, this isn't like an endorsement of Putin. But the way that it's been framed by the U.S. State Department and the U.S. media is outlandish and ridiculous, as though he's the only villain in the situation. Okay. And of course, as we continue talking about inaction on behalf of Democrats when it comes to domestic policy that would help the poor and working class, they have no problem jumping into action to make sure that the war machine carries on. I have an article here to show you in The Intercept. Democrats are rushing through a massive Ukraine defense bill. The House of Representatives is looking to skip markup and hold a floor vote as soon as next week. Democrats in the House of Representatives are planning to expedite a massive bill that would dramatically increase U.S. security assistance to Ukraine and lay the groundwork for substantial new sanctions on Russia, hastening a war-friendly posture without opportunity for dissent as concerns over a military invasion abound. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi told members on a caucus call Tuesday that she's looking to skip marking up the bill and move it straight to the House floor, setting up the possibility for a vote as soon as early next week, two congressional sources told The Intercept. The sources spoke on the condition of anonymity because they're not authorized to talk it to the press. Pelosi's office did not immediately reply to a request for comment. Quote, "This is how the space for non-military options gets slowly slowly closed off, in Washington without any real debate," one of the sources, a senior Democratic aide, told The Intercept. The situation in Ukraine has escalated in recent days, with more than 100,000 Russian troops reportedly stationed along the Ukrainian border, while Western leaders seek to create a unified front to deter what they fear is a Russian invasion. British intelligence released an unusual report over the weekend on an alleged plot to install a leader friendly to Russia. On Sunday, the Biden administration advised Americans to leave the country because of impending reports that Russia is planning significant military action against Ukraine, escalating tensions in the eyes of local officials, and put troops on standby for deployment in Eastern Europe. And I just want to note, you guys, that this seems to mostly be noises coming from the West. Now, again, I'm not trying to minimize or downplay Putin's potential aggression or how awful he fucking is, okay? It's not a defense of Putin's government. But the Ukraine foreign minister himself came out and said, basically, "We appreciate your solidarity, but please stop throwing gas on the fire." I'm paraphrasing, but he basically told the West, what we need right now is not this inflammatory rhetoric. He said that he does not think an invasion from Russia is imminent. So that's from the Ukraine foreign minister. Yet the West is fear-mongering about the situation. Okay, so again, I'm trying to be nuanced here. And get down to the details of this thing. It seems like Russia is behaving aggressively, but Ukraine is not concerned about an imminent invasion. The Western media and the State Department, the United States State Department, are fear-mongering about an immediate invasion and using it as an excuse to send more weapons to the Ukrainian border. And I want to take the opportunity to note, you guys, that this is another example of Democrats asking the pay-for question when it comes to social services and things that would enhance the well-being of their constituents, and entirely ignoring it when it comes to something that would help the weapons manufacturers, like another handout that they don't fucking need. By the way, it's also worth noting that a lot of the groups that we're arming in the UK are literal neo-Nazis. So that's not great either. Just all around bad situation going on in the Ukraine. And I don't want to minimize in pointing out that Ukraine does not seem as concerned about this as the West. I don't want to minimize the potential that this has to spark a massive international conflict, you guys. There are reports that Iran, China, and Russia are preparing for a worldwide conflict. So I'm not trying to minimize the potential that this has to be a very explosive situation. And when you have nuclear powers involved, that obviously is of grave concern. I'm just trying to apply the proper nuance, and it seems like the Western press is ignoring the message from Ukraine, the actual Ukrainians, the Ukrainian foreign minister himself. So much of this noise coming from the West and not from Ukraine, and I think that's worth noting. In a sort of tangentially related story here, I want to show you guys an article about the military contractors. This is from the Quincy Institute. Big war CEOs. There's chaos in the world and our prospects are excellent. With candor you don't hear in official circles, top arms contractors say recent violence and tension works in their shareholders' favor. Now, I want to note there's a taxpayer reference here that I have to debunk in the first sentence. And I love you, Quincy Institute, but this is awful. According to chief executives of the top taxpayer-funded weapons firms, they're not taxpayer-funded, you guys, as MMT teaches us. Currency-issuing governments do not use taxes to fund their spending. And that kind of rhetoric, unfortunately, plays right into conservative hands. If you use that kind of language, please stop using that kind of language. And if on some chance someone from the Quincy Institute is listening to this, please say publicly funded instead. Please. So I'll restart with that phrasing. According to chief executives of the top publicly funded weapons firms, their balance sheets will benefit from the U.S. engaging in great power competition with Russia and China, the recent escalations in the Yemen war, and the potential for a Russian invasion of Ukraine. But at least one CEO didn't want to give the impression that weapons firms are simply merchants of death, claiming that her firm, the third largest weapon producer in the world, actually promotes human rights proliferation. You got to be fucking kidding me. Those comments were all made on quarterly earnings calls this week, at which executives for publicly traded companies speak to investors and analysts who follow their industries and answer questions about their financial outlook. The occasion brings out a degree of candor among companies' fundamentals and their business interests that aren't always disclosed in marketing materials and carefully worded press releases. For example, CEOs of both Lockheed Martin and Raytheon outright acknowledged that a deteriorating state of global peace and security and an increase in deadly violence are very much in the interest of their employees and investors. Lockheed CEO James Takelet, I apologize if I mispronounced that, assured investors that the $740 billion defense budget, 12 times the budget provided to the State Department to conduct diplomacy, could continue to grow in 2023, a critical metric for weapons contractors, the ultimate recipient of nearly half of all defense spending. And they have his quote there. Raytheon CEO Greg Hayes took a cruder approach, appearing to celebrate a potential war with Ukraine and Houthi drone strikes on the UAE as good indicators for future weapon sales. My God. Responding to an analyst question about increased demands for weapons, quote, from international countries, just given the rising tensions. And again, they have the direct quote there. But in a moment of rare self-awareness in the calls, Northrop Grumman CEO attempted to distance herself from the celebration of increased global conflict by making the bold claim that the world's fifth largest weapons manufacturer and a trainer of Saudi troops accused of war crimes in Yemen is a promoter of global human rights. That's Kathy Warden, and they have the direct quote there. So I wanted to make sure you all knew that they're openly bragging about how great this is for business. And I also saw, I can't remember who shared this. I wish I could give him credit, but there was I want to say it was a Politico piece. You know how some news outlets are starting to put sponsors right under the title. So someone shared that there was, I think it was Politico. I'll feel bad if it was the wrong outlet, but I think it was Politico that had a piece about essentially throwing fuel on the fire about the whole conflict in Ukraine. And then right below it, it said sponsored by Lockheed Martin. I mean, I guess at least they're being fucking honest about it, right? Like at least it's just right out there in the open. This is weapons manufacturers telling you this. But as usual, you guys, we are not engaging in a way that, whatever you think of the other actors involved in U.S. foreign policy, it's almost always the case that we're engaging in a negative way, that we're harming the situation, and that appears to be the case here as well. We're arming neo-Nazis and fanning the flames of a potential World War III. That's just not good stuff, you guys. It's not good stuff. It's also a deeply complicated situation in terms of what the Ukrainian people actually want. So I'm not going to go into that because I'm no expert in the matter. But it doesn't seem like it's this clear-cut Putin bad situation in the Ukraine either. So, and again, you guys, I've tried to be very clear. I'm not a fan of Vladimir Putin. Okay, I condemn Vladimir Putin and his imperialist, aggressive military approach. But it just is a little bit more complicated than most of the outlets in the West would have you believe. And we'll see what comes of it. I hope that Biden's slip up about being more measured and less hawkish was real. Some of you might have seen that. He gave a presser where he basically said our response would be based on what Russia did. I rather hear that than like we're going to hit you hard no matter what kind of a thing. We're going to, put on the tough guy look. But I hope that more measured heads can calm the situation down. But certainly the weapons manufacturers know which side they're on, right? And know where their bread is buttered. So we'll see what happens here going forward. And we'll continue to cover the situation in Ukraine. It has every potential to be explosive, but I want to make sure everyone knows that Ukraine is not as concerned about an imminent invasion as the West would have you believe. So that's where we'll leave that story, and we'll continue covering it as updates come along. So I want to talk about how a court has struck down the Biden administration, their attempt to essentially engage in a bunch of drilling in New Mexico to lease a bunch of land for drilling, public land for drilling. So I have an article this is in Rolling Stone. Federal court rules Biden isn't taking the climate climate crisis seriously. The administration's bid to lease 80 million acres of the Gulf of Mexico for drilling was thwarted in court on Thursday. I'm sorry, did I say New Mexico? I meant the Gulf of Mexico. I'm all over the place today, aren't I, guys? A federal judge on Thursday sided with environmental groups by revoking more than 80 million acres of oil and gas leases in the Gulf of Mexico that the Biden administration had approved in what had been the largest such sale in U.S. history. The decision in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia found the administration didn't adequately consider the effects of greenhouse gas emissions from drilling activity in the Gulf of Mexico. Quote, "This is huge." Brittany Hardy, a lawyer for Earth Justice, an environmental group that was part of the lawsuit, told the New York Times, quote, "This requires the Bureau to go back to the drawing board and actually consider the climate costs before it offers these leases for sale, and that's really significant," Hardy added. "Once these leases are issued, there's development that's potentially locked in for decades to come that is going to hurt our global climate." So this is a good ruling, and it may put some institutional hurdles between big oil and their ability to drill on public lands. I think that's great to whatever extent that is, that's effective. One thing I do want to point out, though, is that this is yet another issue, you guys, where the Biden administration wants credit for somehow being good on the environment. What have they done? What have they done? They rejoined the Paris Climate Accord. Is that it? Really? Like, that's less than the bare minimum, and they want credit for somehow being an environmental administration. We covered last week how they approved over 3,500 new drilling permits in Biden's first year. That was way more than Trump had approved in his first year. This is not an administration that is engaging in a way that would indicate it's taking the climate crisis seriously at all. And here a court has to strike them down. And by the way, they're trying to claim like this really weird, they're trying to say they were like legally obligated to lease this land. And a court's like, no, you were legally obligated to make sure that what you're doing is not going to destroy the environment. I mean, it just, you guys, it goes to show how hollow the rhetoric from Joe Biden and the Democrats truly is. And I'm glad that this court has stepped up and done the right thing and told Biden, no, you can't fucking do that. We'll see how the administration responds. And I just want to point out, it's not as though this administration has been environmentally friendly. And on a somewhat related issue, I'm sure some of you have followed, we've covered extensively the Stephen Donziger story, who successfully sued Chevron for their pollution in Ecuador and then was essentially prosecuted by Chevron's law firm and has been on house arrest for years. Stephen tweeted this out. "Seems not a one large media outlet has reported on the 57-page findings by 4 prominent lawyers that I was denied a fair trial and that my Chevron-orchestrated detention is illegal. Where are you? New York Times, CNN, MSNBC, NPR, ABC, CBS, and NBC." And there are many more that have refused to cover that as well. I want to show you a piece in The Nation that goes into some of these details. Chevron's prosecution of Stephen Donziger. Documents reveal a close collaboration between the... I'm so sorry, you guys, for these fucking ads. The computer is being slower than all hell. Give me just a second. I apologize. Jesus. Boy, it is really not wanting to work, is it? So Donziger obviously was prosecuted by private lawyers who represent Chevron, and it's saying I've read my 3 free articles on the fucking Nation, so I can't bring this to you guys. Don't you love paywalls? God damn it. Essentially, what came out is documents revealed that there was much more behind-the-scenes collaboration between Chevron's lawyers, Gibson Dunn, and the courts who oversaw the process. So it's effectively Chevron was allowed to manipulate the legal system in a way that no one else is. It again just debunks this idea of formalism. What the legal system is for you and I is not what the legal system is for Chevron. It's not what the legal system is for banks. It's not what the legal system is for military contractors, etc. They have access to the high-priced law firms that have all the resources and know all the tricks and network with all of the decision makers. So there's all sorts of corruption and layers involved to this, but the result is heavily skewed in favor of the powerful. and Chevron again getting away with this. The reason this ties into the earlier story is because Biden has now appointed one of those lawyers who represented Chevron and prosecuted Stephen Donziger to be a federal judge. So, you know, Biden not even attempting to hide his position on the environment here, appointing a Chevron lawyer to federal judge, right? After doing nothing, by the way, about the Donziger prosecution. He certainly could have as president. He oversees the Justice Department. So making his position unequivocally clear here, granting 3,500 drilling permits, right? Trying to do all this drilling over millions of acres in the Gulf of Mexico, on and on. And yet he wants to portray himself as being somehow progressive on the climate. It's absolute nonsense. So I want to bring you guys a story here. This is quite an old story, but there's been somewhat of an update. This is in Politico. Ex-Pope Benedict admits to giving false statement in child abuse report. The former pope claims it was the result of an oversight in the editing of his statement. Former Pope Benedict has admitted providing false information during an investigation into sexual abuse when he was Archbishop of Munich. Last week, he was accused in a report of failing to act over child sexual abuse during his time as Archbishop. The report says that Benedict, who as Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger was Archbishop of Munich from 77 to 82, knew of child-abusing priests who remained in active pastoral care roles under his watch in southern Germany. Lawyers who investigated the abuse had disputed an assertion by Benedict that he did not recall attending a meeting in 1980 to discuss the case of an abuser priest. On Monday, a statement given to the Catholic news agency said Benedict had in fact attended that meeting, adding that the omission was not done out of malicious intent, but was the result of an oversight in the editing of his statement. Statement concluded that Benedict is very sorry for this mistake and asks to be excused. At least 235 alleged perpetrators were uncovered in the Archdiocese of Munich, according to last week's report, which examined sexual abuse and the handling of complaints in the period from 45 to 2019. The study discovered, at least 497 victims last week. Current Pope Francis pledged justice for the victims of sexual abuse by members of the Catholic Church. Now, I want to remind everybody what the church's initial response to this scandal was. The then Pope said that what he thought that these children needed was the most loving pastoral care. Can you think of a more nauseating thing to say to children who had been raped and molested by priests? That what they need is loving pastoral care. This was the church's apology. And, you know, I think religious institutions like the Catholic Church, really in particular the Catholic Church with their history, ought to be widely condemned for the, impact that they have had on human relations throughout history. We could go through, I mean, Jesus, the Crusades, you know what I mean? Killing atheists all over the world, burning them at the stake, homophobia, misogyny, endorsing the African slave trade. I could go on and on about the Catholic Church forever. The fact that Hitler's first treaty was signed with the Vatican. I mean, same with Mussolini. I could go on and on and on about the Catholic Church as an institution and how horrific, they have been. And this, the most recent scandal, a systemic series of rape and sex crimes against children that was covered up by the highest levels. Ratzinger then also brought one of the main perpetrators from Boston. I'm blanking on the guy's name. It's right on the tip of my tongue. From Boston, before he could be prosecuted in the United States, and gave him a bayfront, home at the Vatican to live out the rest of his years in peace after he had abused children for decades. So Cardinal Law, I think was his name. Might have that wrong. I think it was Law. Anyway, Ratzinger had very clearly engaged in the cover-up here, and there is finally a tiny portion of an admission that he had covered up portions of this that he knew in 1980 about this scandal that was ongoing. And this is, you guys, granting one of my, whatever your personal beliefs are, I'm not trying to sit up here and attack anybody. One of the things about religion that I think really turns me off is the abjection that you are supposed to engage in with that religion, with your God, with the religious officials, that you are supposed to be servile, that you are supposed to completely give yourself to and grovel to these beings or people or institutions. Really turns me off, and it leads to situations where parents are trusting predators with their children. So I'm glad to see a little bit of an admission here, and I felt compelled to cover this when I saw that the story came out. I just want to urge everybody to be careful about how you view institutions of power, and how you let them affect your behavior. So to move on here to marijuana policy, this is another issue that the Biden administration has completely neglected to address. This isn't as much of a broken promise as some of the other things that he has like explicitly promised and then not done. Biden's been very wishy-washy about what his views on marijuana and drug policy are. Of course, in 1994, he was the author of the crime bill, which resulted in tons and tons of people being locked up, in particular people, Black and Indigenous people being locked up for drugs and other minor offenses. But in recent years, Biden has not been very clear what his position on marijuana is. This is something he could do unilaterally. Obviously, he could deschedule marijuana. And he has not done that at all. He also hasn't addressed, he said he would reform the legal system and reform police. Instead, he has given out more money to police departments through federal subsidies and done nothing about the Justice Department whatsoever as it pertains to how law enforcement behaves and things of this sort, and the biases, the racism, all this that you know is present in the justice system. So I want to show you guys a clip here. This is, again, More Perfect Union. I again encourage you all to follow their work. They do excellent stuff. This is them talking about Joe Biden's inadequate, or really just lack of action entirely on drug policy.
Fucking fix this.
In the mid-90s and early 2000s, I was working on a career in the music industry, working with industry legends like Snoop Dogg and Tupac Shakur's recording group, when I was approached by a confidential informant who purchased $900 worth of cannabis from me on 3 occasions. I was prosecuted federally and was sentenced to a 55-year mandatory minimum as a first-time offender.
We were one of the first dispensaries in the country. We received over 2 decades in prison for a nonviolent cannabis offense. I'm currently serving my 14th year in prison, and I have 6 left.
At 19, I was charged with simple possession of marijuana in Mississippi, and I got sentenced to a year in jail and 5 years probation. At the end of the 5-year sentence, I was picked up for conspiracy to traffic marijuana. My full sentence is 60 years, and this is my 12th year locked up.
So after I was released from prison, I decided to help to get the people I left behind out of prison. There's a number of people in there whose sentences are more ridiculous than mine, and they don't have celebrities and political figures pulling for them like I did. Currently, there are roughly 2,700 people serving federal prison time for a nonviolent cannabis offense. There are murderers in prison and rapists and terrorists and everything who are serving a fraction of what I was sentenced to. When President Biden was running for office, he made a promise.
I think we should decriminalize marijuana, period. And I think anyone who has a record should be let out of jail, their records expunged, it be completely zeroed out.
And so we're gonna hold him to his promise, especially right now when we have this 2-tiered system of justice where If you're wealthy and if you're an older white male, you can profit from the cannabis industry, while many people of color and people from poor neighborhoods are still sitting in prison for doing the same thing.
My name's Kyle Kazan, and I'm the co-founder, CEO, and chairman of Glasshouse Brands. Glasshouse Brands is a very large cannabis company that's publicly traded on the OTC and on the New York Exchange in Canada. Are we a legal business? Yes, we're a legal business in the state of California, where we operate. We are illegal federally, like every single business that operates in the United States, because the United States still has cannabis, oddly enough, as a Schedule I drug.
Watching people cash in on the legal marijuana market while we're incarcerated is one of the most egregious injustices.
Luke was running a medicinal marijuana dispensary in Modesto, California in 2004. He and a partner.
We followed California law to the letter. We were licensed by the city. We had a permit from the state. We paid 100% of our taxes, both state and federal taxes.
George Bush was the president, and they were prosecuting marijuana businesses. They didn't recognize California's medical marijuana laws, just like federal law does not recognize the state laws in existence today. But what's happened since Luke was prosecuted are a number of things. The Obama administration instructed prosecutors not to prosecute individuals who are following state law. In 2014, Congress has introduced a rider that precludes the DOJ from using funds to prosecute businesses or individuals that are operating within the state's medical marijuana laws. And Luke falls within that guidelines. And so today, not only would Luke not be prosecuted, he couldn't be prosecuted. And he's still sitting in prison.
He ran one dispensary. I'm sitting in one right here in Los Angeles. My company has numerous, we're opening up more.
Parker Coleman, he has a very egregious case. He is currently serving a 60-year sentence.
He has 50 years to go. Nonviolent cannabis crime.
I can go and buy shares in weed stocks now. How am I still in here? Like, that can't be that hypocritical. Like, that's too blatant.
What we do in an hour is far more than he did that's gotten him 60 years, that's putting him in hell. So if you're not going to let Parker out, arrest me. Have some consistency.
I know that you care about justice and equity, Mr. President. I've served 14 years in prison for a nonviolent cannabis offense. I hope that you'll have the courage and that you'll agree that this is enough and that you'll fulfill that promise, grant clemency to all cannabis offenders in federal prison.
I really feel like I deserve another shot at life. You know, I want that for my parents, my friends, my family, you as well, to see the ability I have to strengthen our community. And so I ask that you show me mercy.
What can the everyday person, what can my family and friends that are watching this, what can they do? They can go to cannabisclemencynow.org and you can learn more about this. You can sign the petition for President Biden, which is very important.
We need President Biden to act now.
Joe Biden, fucking fix this.
So I admire the way that Luke and Parker are a little bit more gentle in the way that they address President Biden, but I'm going to take a different route. I think he's a conservative, racist ghoul who has long propped up an unjust system. And I think if he wants to have any positive impact on the legal system at all, he needs to entirely undo what he has spent his entire career building. And that would very much include releasing these people and how many thousands, if not more, others who are sitting in jail on a marijuana charge or any other drug offense for that matter. I think you decriminalize everything, legalize everything, and you provide robust social services, robust rehab facilities, robust mental health services, etc. And most importantly, you pull people out of poverty. If you do all of those things, you can put a much larger dent in the addiction problem than you will by caging people, obviously. So we've talked about before, and the threads with Alec and things that recidivism rates prove that our strategy does not work, even if you think the things that we're punishing are punishable or should be punished. So even if you think that weed or name the drug is some absolutely horrific, catastrophic thing, and you think people shouldn't be taking it and you think it's harmful, the way to get people off of fill in the blank drug is to give them a life worth living, and that means pulling them out of poverty, giving them a home, giving them a job, giving them purpose, giving them social services, providing mental health care, providing rehab opportunities instead of throwing people in a fucking cage. And Joe Biden is a massive fucking hypocrite on this, because when his son was revealed to have been an addict, he said, "I'm proud of my son for getting through what was a tough situation." I'm paraphrasing, but he said, "I'm proud of my son. He had a drug problem, and I'm proud of him for addressing it." And that should be his approach. It also should be his approach to everybody else. But Biden throws them in a fucking cage, calls them super predators, writes bills to make their lives hell, ruin their lives. Even when they get out of jail, you guys, they often struggle to find housing and employment things. So you've ruined lives. You've ruined them. For them, it's fuck you, go sit in a cage. For his son, it's let me provide you with help, and I'm proud of you for fighting through it. He's a massive, massive hypocrite. And all of these people need to be let out of jail. I said it last week, and I'll say it again. When the pot shops look like an Apple store, it's time to let a lot of people out of prison. And I think it was Parker. One of them noted that they can literally invest in pot shops from prison on their marijuana sentence for having a pot shop. That's a level of absurdity and hypocrisy that it would be comical if it wasn't so sad. So this needs to be addressed immediately. As I said, Biden's been wishy-washy on this. They showed a clip of him on a debate stage making promises about expunging records and things. Follow through on that, Biden. You fucking liar, you ghoul. Do one goddamn thing right on the justice system in your entire career. Let these people out of prison, expunge their records. Okay, that's the bottom line. And we covered last week, too, that Gary Chambers, who's running for the Senate in Louisiana, put out an ad where he's smoking a blunt and talked about how racist our drug policies are. And just to underscore what he was saying, a number of studies have found, you guys, white people possess drugs at least as much as the black community, if not more. Yet, if you're black, you are almost 4 times as likely to be arrested for possession of drugs than a white person is. So there's a clear racial aspect to this as well. And if Joe Biden is at all serious about addressing the systemic racism and addressing the massive problems with our legal system, he will let these people out of prison and expunge their records and deschedule marijuana. But I'm, as I say often with Biden, not naive enough to expect him to. So at this point, guys, I want to show you a segment that I recorded this past week with Good Politic Guy. If you are not following him on Twitter, he is an absolutely fantastic follow. He does a show on YouTube. Go look him up, Good Politic Guy. And this was a segment we recorded last week, so it is perhaps a little bit out of date on some of the updates on the topics we were talking about. Just keep that in mind. This was recorded, I believe, on Wednesday. So this is Mac, also known as Good Politic Guy, joining to talk about the Democrats' inaction and how that will affect them going forward politically. I'm very happy to have back on the show Mac, also known as Good Politic Guy. Mac, thanks as always for taking the time today.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me, man.
For the viewers, if you're not following Mac, you can find him on YouTube. Also going to throw his Twitter handle up on the screen there. Go follow his work. Mac, I just want to get, first of all, can I just get your general views on, I think the last time we talked was maybe over the summer or it's been a little while, just the general inaction on behalf of Biden and Democrats and their propensity to seem to put a lot more time and energy into making up and fabricating excuses for their inaction than actually doing anything. Can you just give your views on the state of politics in the country right now?
Yeah, it's, I mean, honestly, you said we talked like in the summer, and I genuinely feel as though the situation has not materially changed in any substantive way. I mean, the things that we were talking about, like literally months ago with the beginning of the negotiation processes on, Build Back Better or the bipartisan infrastructure framework, or even voting rights legislation like we just saw play out, it pretty much all played out exactly as we were predicting, right? You do these bullshit, bad faith negotiations behind the scenes mostly, and, you're basically allowing a handful of corrupted ghouls within the Democratic Party to completely set the legislative agenda. And, we've seen the natural result, the inevitable result of that, which is just failure and L after L after L. So.
Yeah, and I think, regardless of where you may fall on the spectrum of is it corruption or is it incompetence, and I think it's probably a good deal of both. The result seems to kind of be the same. Can you talk a little bit about the rotating villain that they seem to like to use, and like, I guess I'll put it this way. Do you think the agenda or their purported agenda would be much closer to being accomplished if Manchin and Sinema were out of the way? Or do you think Reid or Kelly or Feinstein or fill in the blank would have just filled that vacuum back up?
Yeah, I mean, listen, we all understand how this works, and it's not like you have to, make it up in your head. We saw this basically exact situation play out under the Obama administration, where he had damn near a supermajority and still passed through a pathetic, right-wing piece of healthcare legislation. So, this is the reality of how politics works with two right-wing corporate parties, right? You have Democrats who are going to show up and be the faces, like we got Joe Manchin, Kirsten Sinema. They're taking a lot of the flack right now, but I mean, we know that they have a couple who are sitting right in the back who would be stepping up to take their place. I mean, if Democrats had 60 senators right now, you'd probably have 10 of them who are opposing whatever the legislation is on the table. If it's anything that is not, a military budget or a handout to corporate America, then you're not going to see any action. I mean, especially I think the bipartisan infrastructure framework was like a perfect example of this, because they celebrate it, right, as this massive bipartisan win, and we brought together this great coalition. And it's like, well, I mean, if you understand the types of people who would be willing to vote for a bill like that, they're mostly just like corrupted Republican senators and corporate Democrats. And the result of that was a completely pathetic, watered down, hollowed out handout to corporate America, essentially, that doesn't even come remotely close to addressing the needs of infrastructure in the country. So it's like, that's what you get from working alongside, a bipartisan coalition. And that reality, I don't think would honestly change, even if it was Democrats who had 60, Senate seats. They're just going to have 10 Democrats start acting like Republicans, basically.
Yeah. And the disconnect for me, and this is where I start to question sort of even the intention of a lot of the people in powerful positions here, is how popular their purported agenda actually is. I mean, the stuff that we talk about on the left has often 70 plus, even sometimes 80+% approval. Things like universal health care, things like tuition-free college, things like, I mean, even some of the stuff that they did, which was like mildly progressive and then allowed to be undone, like the child tax credit or the stimulus checks, right? So where do you think that disconnect is, and how malicious do you view their intentions as being?
Well, I mean, I see it as incompetence, in the sense that I genuinely do believe that, corporate Democrats like Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, the establishment leaders of the Democratic Party, that they probably do in the back of their minds think that, politics is just this internal game between them and their friends who are, overwhelmingly wealthy, and they've been in these positions for years and years. And they think it's just sort of this internal game, right? That's static, and, you can't really change the nature of who's going to vote in favor or against what piece of legislation. And they basically want to keep it as that. They want to keep it as this, this game that they're going back and forth, when the reality is the best weapon is exactly what you were just saying, is public support. The best weapon that any politician has at their disposal to try to pass through and force people to fall in line on these major agenda items is that you have to weaponize the fact that you have all of this external organizing, all of this external pressure that you could use at any time you wanted. Joe Biden could have gone to Arizona. He could have gone to West Virginia. He could have been doing these rallies this entire time using that weapon. And the fact that they, have taken a back seat to this and tried to negotiate behind closed doors with completely corrupted, bad faith actors, that to me is the most malicious part, is because it's like, yeah, you're incompetent, but you're also not even like mildly trying. You're not even using the one thing in the bully pulpit that could actually get them to shift your position. You're at that point, I mean, basically the situation we have right now is Joe Biden is giving a pen to Joe Manchin and saying, here, write my legislative agenda. And even when that's the case, sometimes Joe Manchin isn't even in favor of the own shit that he was compromising on, right? We just saw this with Build Back Better. He put his own $1.8 trillion proposal on the table for Joe Biden, and then rescinded it, and then said, no, I'm not even in favor of the thing that I said I was in favor of a couple months ago. Like, it's a complete joke. It's just a game that they're playing.
Yeah, I mean, he during the campaign season, Manchin went so far as to say that he would support up to, I believe it was 4 was the figure. He gave $4 trillion. And then all of a sudden the negotiation starts at like 2.5, and he's like, way too much, and he just keeps talking himself back and back and back. It's just really that people can't see through this. I think it's kind of incredible. So I saw you put a video out just the other day here about the situation with Ukraine, and I was hoping you could talk a little bit about to me, it sort of undercuts their argument that it's so hard to do anything in Washington that the moment there's an opportunity to throw fuel on the fire of war, we have no problem rushing to put together legislation to send weapons around the fucking world. Can you just talk a little bit about the priorities and what that says about the Democrats' rhetoric about how difficult it is to do things in Washington?
Yeah, I mean, listen, like we were just talking about with public support, I would like to see some polling done on sending, weapons and ammunitions to Ukraine right now. I mean, or even, heating up the potential of a hot war with Russia right now. I mean, I don't think that the overwhelming majority of Americans want to go, fight and die for territory that they couldn't even point out on a map. So that's number one. But I mean, these are the priorities that both the Democratic and Republican parties have been having for decades. I mean, if there's one thing you can find consistent bipartisanship on, it's war, and it's again, handouts for corporate America. It's very consistent that we have seen this, but I mean, yeah, their priorities are always going to be shoving through the Pentagon budgets, shoving through the State Department increases, and weapon sales to Saudi Arabia and all of these other countries. And now it's just adding Ukraine to that list, trying to increase tensions with another, nuclear armed superpower, as if, we should be expanding our military alliances right up onto the border of Russia. It's absolutely batshit crazy, in my opinion.
Yeah, and they do this. They like to start the story at the most convenient place so they can claim self-defense, right? So Psaki gave that presser where she said, "Let's not forget who the aggressor here. The aggressor is Russia." And it's like, wait, isn't there like decades of pretext to all of this that you're just completely like, they like to start at the point where they can say someone else was aggressive and we're just responding to it. One thing about Biden that has somewhat confused me is that he's been absolutely horrendous on virtually every aspect of foreign policy, with the one mild exception of withdrawing from Afghanistan. What's your take on that? What do you think caused him? Is a broken clock just right twice a day? What do you think may have led to some of that? We're still contributing to the genocide in Yemen. We're still supporting the Israeli war crimes in Palestinian territories. We're amping things up with Russia, and we're using xenophobic rhetoric about China. So, like, what do you think maybe was the exception that proves the rule there in Afghanistan?
I mean, honestly, if you look back to Joe Biden's rhetoric under the Obama administration, when he was the vice president, specifically on the issue of Afghanistan, he was, I think, significantly less, ready to continue that war or to do the troop surge than Obama was. So I think he has for a while been, slightly less hawkish on specifically Afghanistan. But, when it comes down to pulling out, I mean, at the end of the day, he was kind of continuing a plan that was started under the Donald Trump administration. And obviously Trump is a coward and didn't want to do that under his administration. But, at the end of the day, it was the right decision. I 100% supported him pulling out of Afghanistan. It was the thing that he got, more shit from the mainstream media and everything than anything else that he has done. There's a massive pushback and a pile-on on him for that. But I think it was the right decision at the end of the day. And yeah, I mean, I think it's not a matter of principle, obviously, because of all of the other reasons that you just said. He's not, a principally anti-war guy in any way, shape, or form. But yeah, I mean, I guess it is kind of a case of a broken clock being right twice a day. But, it's the right decision at the end of the day. And I'll give him some mild credit for that one.
Yeah, we got to give credit where it's due, and it's yeah. Otherwise, we're just kind of no different than the other media heads, right? The interesting thing to me, you brought up the media pushback with Afghanistan, and yet now there are like 23 million Afghans facing starvation, and the media has suddenly gone completely silent about the humanity, right? So when Raytheon can't make a buck on the policy, it seems like they suddenly forget to care. So I've seen, to circle back a little bit to the domestic stuff, I've seen some really. I don't like to get too far into the horse race stuff a lot of the time, but I've seen some really outrageous polling that says Biden is, I mean, this was a bit of a standout, but at 33%, which is 1 point lower than Trump ever hit. Kamala Harris polling worse than Mike Pence and Dick Cheney ever polled. I'm just curious, what are your, will they learn at all from this? Will they learn at all that the inaction does not make them popular? Or do you think we're just going to get these 2-year cycles repeating themselves?
Yeah, no, I don't think they've learned absolutely jack shit from this entire thing. I mean, Joe Biden was just out the other day doing a press conference where he was literally saying, "I don't believe the polling." And it's like, oh, I mean, okay, man, you could say that, but you're kind of overwhelmingly disliked right now. And same with Kamala Harris. I think there's two different components to this, right? I think Kamala Harris's disapproval rating, or her lack of high approval rating, is just because she's Kamala Harris, right? And she's a totally vapid, hollow politician that has no charisma charisma, no substantive policy positions that are popular. So it's like, yeah, no shit, she's unpopular. She's a terrible politician. We saw that in the Democratic primary. So that part's not really that surprising to me. The drop off for Joe Biden, I think, is a little bit more surprising because coming in, obviously, he had an extremely high approval rating, especially after he sent out the stimulus checks. That was when he hit his peak, was a couple weeks after that. And then he just absolutely tanked. And if you go and listen to, you know, the mainstream media, or if you go and listen to, you know, whoever it may be, they're probably going to blame things like, oh, the Afghanistan withdrawal, or they're going to, you know, blame the fact that, oh, he's been listening to Bernie Sanders too much, right? But at the end of the day, if you actually go, and I did a breakdown of this on my channel in a couple of different videos, but if you actually get into the nuances of where his approval rating has been overwhelmingly dropping off, it's significantly with young people who basically held their nose and showed up to vote for this guy, okay, expecting that he was at least going to do some, you know, half-assed, you know, compromises with Bernie Sanders, et cetera. He hasn't even done, you know, the half-assed neoliberal reforms that he ran on. But the most significant drop-off has been among young people, okay? And so what could you do to actually remedy that situation, right? It's mostly under 35-year-olds. Well, cancel student debt, legalize marijuana. You could do so many things just by executive order immediately. I mean, you could go and do this tomorrow on a sheet of paper and just put your name on it, and that's it. I mean, he has these things that he can do that he's simply choosing not to do. For what reason? I mean, you know, you tell me. This is a guy who created a lot of the problems that we're facing right now, even on just those two things that I just mentioned, student debt cancellation. I mean, this is a guy who helped to craft the bankruptcy legislation that led to the student debt crisis we have right now. This is a guy who helped write the crime bill and helped push for the criminalization of marijuana and a whole host of other drugs that shouldn't be criminalized in any way, shape, or form. So it's like, these are the problems that Joe Biden spent his entire Senate career creating alongside Republicans. So it's like, yeah, I mean, did anybody really expect that this guy was going to come in here and be the new FDR, or that he was going to come in here and be a popular president? No. I mean, you know, one of the things that kind of pissed me off the most about the Democratic primary and the rhetoric that was used to advocate for Joe Biden is people would be like, you know, this is a guy who's going to be able to get things done. And it's like, well, what has he actually done? Because you can go look at his career in the Senate, and it's like everything that he's done was kind of sort of the worst things that have happened in modern American history. The Iraq War, the bankruptcy bill, the crime bill, you know, NAFTA, PNT. We can go down the list. There's so many different things that he worked on that were just catastrophic mistakes. So it's like, I don't know how anybody really expected him to be a popular or good legislator. Okay, he's just not that.
Yeah, I think it was Carlin that said bipartisanship just means that a greater than usual deceit is happening, or something to that effect. And I think that's largely true. Usually bipartisanship is awful. And I'm confused by their, like, the flip on rhetoric. They like to accuse progressives of somehow aiding Republicans by running against Democrats in Congress and things like that. And then they turn around and like brag about, like, see how we're working with the Republican. Like, I think it's so.
Or say that Joe Biden should, you know, run a ticket with Liz Cheney or somebody.
Like, oh my God. I just saw Mitt Romney this morning was proposed. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Oh my God. That stuff's nonsense. Yeah. And I also, to add to your list of things that he could do, I just found this out maybe a week ago. Kamala Harris can unilaterally, as president of the Senate, eliminate the filibuster whenever she chooses. So the idea that they have to wait for Manchin and Sinema to come along to, you know, like there are so many places where they're fabricating these hurdles that are in their way that are not really truly in their way.
Right.
I'm curious to get your opinion, as you're in Georgia, right? So that's newly sort of a swing state of sorts. I don't know if you could disagree with that if you're the one there.
I'd call it a swing state, yeah.
Swing state, yeah. So how are voters responding to this? I mean, this is one of the states that flipped to give Biden the presidency and give Democrats the Senate, obviously with Warnock and Ossoff. So how are the voters there responding to this inaction and the sort of pathetic messaging that we're seeing?
I mean, I was just driving home to my house here in downtown Atlanta, Georgia, and I saw a big spray painted "Fuck Joe Biden" on the side of one of the exits by my house. So, you know, I guess that kind of puts into mood what people are feeling here in Atlanta, at least. I can't speak for the rest of the country, but I mean, yeah, everybody sees what's happening right now. You know, Joe Biden, he ran his campaign largely on just being, I'm the guy who's going to beat Donald Trump. And so, you know, the inevitable reality of that is, you know, with enough time passing, with Donald Trump Trump banned off of Twitter and not really in the spotlight anymore, then people are gonna start to see who you are, right? And they're going to start to see this pathetic shell of his former self emerge. And the fact that he hasn't really gotten anything done, hasn't sent material relief to people basically since the stimulus checks. They just let the child tax credit expire. They're doing there's so many different ways they've been letting people down. I mean, even on the stimulus checks, right? That was the main selling point that John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock were using to get themselves elected and to get Joe Biden elected, to motivate Georgia voters. They were saying over and over and over again, $2,000 checks, $2,000 checks. We're going to give a $2,000 check, ship it to you in the mail. And then Joe Biden takes office and it's not a $2,000 check. Sorry. What we had actually meant was, it's this plus this. And, that's the whole Joe Biden administration. It's just been a constant letdown, austerity where there doesn't need to be austerity, and just making everything more complicated and less of the big, bold change that they pretended like they were going to be enacting when they were running.
Absolutely. And I want to circle back to Trump, but I want to note quickly, Pelosi just announced, I think it was yesterday, the day before, that she is running again for the House. Your senator, John Ossoff, was one of the co-sponsors, or I believe he actually wrote the bill, of the bill that would have targeted not just, there are other bills in Congress that target congressional insider trading. Ossoff's bill in particular went further and said, we're also going to target spouses, which seems to be a pretty direct shot at Pelosi because her husband is a big wig investor and they make millions and millions of dollars on this stuff. I was just curious what your thoughts are on that sort of divide that seems to be there. Is that because they were running against Loeffler and Perdue, who themselves were accused of insider trading? Is there maybe some local politics going on there? What do you see with that dynamic?
I definitely would say that was a big component of it, the Perdue and Loeffler corruption, because you saw that plastered on every billboard in downtown Atlanta to motivate people to show up. So it's not really surprising to me that he would try to take a stand like that. Now, again, how much teeth would it actually end up having if we went through the entire legislative process and even Nancy Pelosi got her hands on a bill like that? I don't really know what the end result would be, but in its current form, the bill that John Ossoff, he did actually write it, but the bill that he wrote, it would be pretty good, goddamn good. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. It's the very bare minimum, because we're literally talking about, should politicians be able to literally do insider trading? So it's that shouldn't really be a debate going on right now, but it is a debate apparently. So I kind of wish that in addition to introducing that, because obviously that was intentional on his part, not just the Georgia local politics side of it, but that was a couple weeks after Nancy Pelosi came out and defended insider trading, basically. But so I do think it was kind of a shot across the bow, but he could have gone significantly more aggressive at directly Nancy Pelosi and other corrupt members of Congress who are doing insider trading effectively. So, if you actually want to get something like that passed, you're probably going to have to be a little bit more aggressive about it.
And this may be a naive question with a very obvious answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Why is it that Ossoff can write a bill like that, but if Bernie did, he would be immediately accused of dividing Democrats, you're helping Republicans, you're arming the right, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, everybody, every single liberal, you run against Hillary Clinton and dare to challenge their queen, then, you pretty much burned all of those bridges for a lot of liberals in this country. But I think part of it is that. I think part of it is, John Ossoff, he's better than Joe Manchin, but he's not in line with Bernie Sanders necessarily, or really anywhere close to that. So, he's not nearly as threatening to the establishment, I think, as somebody like Bernie Sanders would be. But yeah, I mean, you know that they're just triggered all the time. They're just pissed at anything that Bernie does. He's always going to be in the wrong.
Yeah, he could write a bill that said Democrats are great, we should all celebrate Democrats, and they'd be like, fuck you, you're dividing the party. It's something else. So I wanted to circle back to Trump, and I'm fascinated by the potential that I think it's kind of hilarious and ironic that Democrats may actually drive him to run again by pursuing legal avenues against him, which would mean that the only immunity that he would have is if he was elected back to the presidency. I don't know. I'm certainly not suggesting that you don't press charges against someone who's committed the kind of crimes that Trump has committed. That's not at all the position I'm taking. I find it kind of hilarious and ironic that they might end up fucking themselves in 2024 by pushing these suits. And I'm just curious what your general thoughts are. Do you think Trump's going to run? Do you think that if he does, he'll be the nominee? And do you think that the Democrats stand any chance of defeating him?
Let's go in order there. I think, yes, that Donald Trump is going to run. I mean, as of right now, unless his health takes a serious turn, I guess. But I definitely think just purely for his own ego, he wants to run again. I actually just saw a clip yesterday, I think it was, of him out on the golf course at Mar-a-Lago, and he called himself the 45th and the 47th president, which is kind of simultaneously acknowledging that he did lose to Joe Biden, but also saying that he does want to run again. So I think he's definitely going to run again. Also, probably because he doesn't want somebody like Ron DeSantis to just, usurp that role from him. And I think that he kind of hates Ron DeSantis right now, because Ron won't, accept and say, I'm not going to run if you decide to run. And so there's kind of a little bit of tension there, I guess. But I think at the end of the day, he is going to run. And if he does run, he's going to win. Okay, it's Donald Trump. He's going to win the Republican primary at least. Then we'll go to a general election, and that basically depends on, whether or not Democrats decide to do anything between now and then, and also, who they decide to nominate. If it's Joe Biden, I think he loses. If it's Kamala Harris, she loses. If it's Pete Buttigieg, he loses. So, you got to get a little bit more creative here if you're actually going to put up a fight against that.
Yeah, I do think that there is beginning to be some acknowledgement among the powers that be, and by that I basically mean like Barack Obama and those types who have the sort of behind the scenes leverage among the party elites. I think there is some acknowledgement that Kamala might have been a horrendous mistake. Now, whether or not they will admit that or do anything about it, I think is a totally different story. They seem to be prepping Pete for another run, which I think would be insufferable for all of us. But he is sort of that you couldn't really make a better democratic robot in a lab than Pete. Do you have any speculation about what the left may be able to accomplish in 2024? Do you see anyone stepping up to fill that void for us and taking a leadership role? I'm less and less inclined to engage. No, not engage. I'm less and less inclined to place my hopes in electoral politics. I think direct action and organizing and strikes and things like this are probably going to produce more. But at the same time, I still view it as a tool, and I'm very disheartened by the lack of leadership that's arisen on the left since Bernie.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of it depends on what Joe Biden decides to do, because it is damn near impossible, regardless of how unpopular they are, to beat a sitting president in a primary and then go on to win a general election. So that in and of itself would be extremely difficult if Biden decides to run. If he doesn't decide to run, then it's a lot more of an open field, and maybe we could throw somebody in there who, gets some name attention and stuff, and takes that from Kamala and Pete, which, they're not exactly the hardest people to beat in a Democratic primary, if that's what it comes down to, right? Especially Kamala Harris. But, I mean, as far as names that I could throw out there, man, it's looking pretty dark right now. Bernie, he's going to be 650 years old. He's not going to run again. I don't know. I've floated out John Fetterman, who I think is, he's running for Pennsylvania Senate, and I think he's better than a lot of the Democrats that we have in office right now. He's in favor of Medicare for all, legalizing marijuana, living wages, et cetera. You can go down the line. So he's definitely marginally better. And I think he actually could have a good chance against somebody like Donald Trump, because he is from, a small town, and he is from a state like Pennsylvania, where he does really focus on working class politics, and he knows how to, use a lot of the rhetoric in the right ways to appeal to different people without going, too far towards identity politics and shit like that. So I think John Fetterman is somebody, and I'm being really idealistic here and saying that's kind of a Hail Mary, assuming he even wins the Pennsylvania race. So I don't really know. I mean, we're going to have to get creative, but either way, regardless if Joe Biden runs again or who they throw out there, we got to throw some people into that mix. Okay. Because, even having that pressure applied on them, make them a little bit uncomfortable, I think it'll be worth it. But at the end of the day, I'm 100% in agreement with you. We got outside action, direct action. We have all of these different other, especially the revitalization of the labor movement over the last year that we've seen. Those are going to be much more effective and actually achieving material concessions than 2024 is going to be for us.
Yeah, 100%. And the top line gets a whole lot of attention, the president, the Senate, etc. But what do you think, without, obviously there's too much of it to talk about specifically, but do you think that the movement is making some progress at the local level that can build some infrastructure for us going forward? I think we have a better chance in 2028 and 2032, et cetera, if we have better infrastructure at the local level developed. Do you see some movement there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've worked with a couple local campaigns. I'm going to be working with another one here. That's a local race here in Georgia. And so I think building some of those up and actually going after some of those local seats and stuff does actually help in the broader scheme of things. But yeah, the mutual aid organizations. There's some fantastic mutual aid organizations in Atlanta. So I mean that is the way that you actually build up economic democracy from the bottom. Okay, and I think that's the best route that we can go in preparing for that inevitable future that you're talking about right there. And that's something that Republicans are doing, conservatives are doing to an absolutely absurd degree right now. I mean, you see all of these wild fascists just going and taking over school boards and all of these different positions around the country, and just flipping everything on its head. And that's something that you kind of got to counterbalance, right? Unless you want to lose that fight at the ground level, it gets much more difficult to win it at those upper levels like you were talking about.
Absolutely. And Matt, can you just reiterate for the audience where they can find your work and where they can follow you?
Yeah, you can just look me up on Twitter, look me up on YouTube, Good Politic Guy. That's pretty much all it is. I got daily YouTube videos that I put out covering the daily news, and I tweet about shit a lot. So that's basically it.
Excellent follow on Twitter. Encourage everybody to go follow Mac. Thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate having you.
All right, appreciate it, man.
So great segment. Thanks to Mac for joining, and just want to reiterate, you guys, it's the avenue for change here is almost all going to be through the labor movement that we cover on a regular basis, the direct action, all that kind of stuff. Electoral politics is one tool, but very much worth diving into there. And the Democrats are soon to find out why, when you get elected to power and do nothing, you don't get to hold on to that power, right? So we'll see what prospects come in the coming years electorally. In the meantime, I encourage you all to organize locally. If you do happen to have good candidates in your area, I encourage you to get involved with those candidates. I'm personally a kitchen sink kind of guy. If you have progressives who, for me, it's important that they understand MMT. If there are progressives that understand MMT that are running as independents or Greens or trying to primary a Democrat, I say throw the kitchen sink at it. If you got a good candidate in your area, do what you can to help them. And other than that, I say direct most of your focus on the direct action. Help out local striking workers, unionization efforts, help out with mutual aid, protests, demonstrations, etc. Try to keep the pressure on as best as we possibly can. And I think Mac did a great job there breaking down the inaction from Democrats, which again, it's not that that was unexpected. It's just no less worthy of covering, right? So Biden and Democrats had an opportunity to prove all of us lefties wrong and actually get a damn thing done when we gave them all their power, and they squandered it. They did nothing. They did what we expected them to. So that's kind of where we're at. And speaking of Democrats, I mentioned earlier the not so wonderful news that Nancy Pelosi is running for re-election. This is in NPR. Pelosi is running for re-election, but is silent on a bid to retain her leadership post. She had previously promised to step down from leadership at the end of 2022. I seriously doubt she's going to. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi confirmed in a video posted Tuesday that she is running for re-election for her for her San Francisco-based district, but she didn't address whether she plans to seek another term as the top House Democratic leader. Pelosi, 81, made history when she took the gavel as the first female Speaker of the House. They got to highlight that, right? Not how absolutely catastrophic she has been for the very people she claims to represent. She led the efforts to enact the Affordable Care Act in 2009 and 2010, a Heritage Foundation written right-wing. Oh, what happened here? I'm so sorry, guys. I didn't notice that. That is better. That's what I was trying to do. They frame the Affordable Care Act as though it is a positive piece of legislation. It's a right-wing piece of healthcare legislation written by the Heritage Foundation, initially endorsed by Richard Nixon and Bob Dole and Chuck Grassley, and first implemented by Mitt Romney. I think I could regurgitate that in my sleep. And yet it's framed here in NPR as though it is progressive. The signature legislative accomplishment of then President Barack Obama and her most lasting legacy as Speaker. That's her legacy. That's her legacy. She took a Heritage Foundation healthcare plan and put it into and implemented it. The backlash to the new healthcare law helped fuel a massive midterm loss in 2010, with Republicans sweeping into control of the House, but Pelosi touted the law's growing popularity in the 2018 midterms and vowed to protect the law from GOP vows to repeal and replace it. And by the way, that whole saga sort of proved something that I think the left has long been saying, which is that if you just implement these policies, it's really fucking difficult to undo them, you guys. If a policy as shitty as Obamacare was that difficult for Republicans to undo when they had full power, they knew they couldn't because their constituents there was uproar about it when they went to repeal and replace it, right? They know their base loves hearing we're going to repeal and replace it, but they also know the kind of blowback that there will be. So when people say something like, well, don't use executive action for that because the Republicans will just undo it. There are a lot of policies, you guys, that would be instantly so popular that it would be virtually impossible for the Republicans to undo it. So that's one of the arguments the left has made about Biden and his lack of action with that executive pen. And I think that Pelosi kind of, accidentally demonstrating exactly why that is true. The bad news, obviously, that she is running for re-election at 81 years old. I encourage everybody to support her challenger, Shahid Buttar. Shahid, a little teaser. We've been in touch about maybe doing an interview here soon, and I'm hoping to get something on the books with Shahid. I was fortunate enough when I volunteered in San Francisco for the Bernie Sanders campaign to meet some of Shahid's volunteers who were working the same area that I was canvassing. And it seems like a really, really energetic campaign. It seemed like there was a lot of energy there to me. San Francisco is a very, very progressive district. There's such a machine that has propped Pelosi up. She refuses to debate Shahid and doesn't have to pay any price for that. And I think that if he can kind of break through the name recognition thing and, going what is second time, I think, running against her this time, maybe even third, but it's at least second, that'll keep increasing, right? As people start to know him, I think he'll have more success. So I encourage everybody to support Shahid in his attempt to unseat Pelosi, who just announced she is running again. She's obviously, you guys, when she came into Congress, she I say pretended. I don't know if she really meant it or not. She certainly doesn't now. She said that she was in favor of single-payer healthcare. And now she obviously has spent decades, over a decade in leadership, but decades in the House, playing gatekeeper for the Republicans and stopping any progressive policy like single-payer healthcare from coming to the floor, and stomping out any progressives that dare to challenge her power. It's the counter-scheduling that the Clintons started. That's basically Pelosi's politics. So she claims she supports a progressive agenda while she squashes that progressive agenda. And somehow gets away with it because the media, like NPR, frame things like that, right? Oh, hero of the Affordable Care Act, first woman to be speaker. Yeah, you left out that she, played stenographer for and groveled to corporations. You left out that she served the banking industry through 2 crashes. They conveniently leave out a whole bunch of stuff. How many crimes have we committed? Or I'm sorry, how many countries have we committed war crimes in? While Pelosi has been a leading member of Congress, I mean, they leave out all of the substance and say first female speaker, and she did the Affordable Care Act. She did a right-wing healthcare plan. Congratulations. Hardly surprised that she is running again. These powerful people tend to not let go of their power when they have it. And even though she's worth hundreds of millions of dollars and could go enjoy her retirement, she is not going to let go of that power. I encourage you all to look into and support Shahid's campaign. If you happen to be in the San Francisco area, perhaps get involved with donating your time, or if you can donate to his campaign directly. I encourage you all to do so. Pelosi needs to be taken out of Congress and certainly out of leadership as well, which will be a whole nother fight whether she chooses to run for it or not. Unfortunately, it's incredibly unlikely that we would actually get a decent representative in that leadership position either way. So it would probably be Hakeem Jeffries, who's not really any better than Pelosi. So the master legislator, as she is known, refusing to let go of her stranglehold on power over Congress. Bad news. So I want to get to a couple of stories in Africa. We have a piece here in The Intercept about how the U.S. is again engaging in training people who then commit military coups. Excuse me. This again is The Intercept. It's by Nick Terse. Another U.S.-trained soldier stages a coup in West Africa. The leader of a coup in Burkina Faso is the latest in a line of U.S.-trained soldiers who overturned civilian leaders. And just for the record, this is anecdotal, but this has happened all over Western Africa. So this is just the latest, okay? And we're actually going to get into another story that sort of pertains to it. The coup was announced on state television Monday by a young oh, I'm sorry, I started a paragraph in, didn't I? Earlier this week, the military seized power in Burkina Faso, ousting the country's democratically elected president, Roch-Marc Christian Kabore. The coup was announced on state television Monday by a young officer who said the military had suspended the constitution and dissolved the government. Beside him sat a camouflage-clad man who he introduced as Burkina Faso's new leader, Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba. I apologize if I butcher any of these names, you guys. The commander of one of the country's 3 military regions. Damiba is a highly trained soldier, thanks in no small part to the U.S. military, which has a long record of training soldiers in Africa who go on to stage coups. Damiba, it turns out, participated in at least a half dozen U.S. training exercises, according to the U.S. Africa Command, or AFRICOM. In 2010 and 2020, he participated in an annual special operations training program known as the Flintlock Exercise. In 2013, Damiba was accepted into an Africa Contingency Operations Training and Assistance course, which is a State Department-funded peacekeeping training program. In 2013 and 2014, Damiba attended the U.S.-sponsored Military Intelligence Basic Officer course, Africa. And in 2018 and 2019, he participated in engagements with a U.S. Defense Department civil military support element in Burkina Faso. Damiba is just the latest in a carousel of coup leaders in West Africa, trained by the U.S. military, as the U.S. has pumped in more than $1 billion in security assistance to promote stability in the region. Since 2008, U.S.-trained officers have attempted at least 9 coups and succeeded in at least 8 across 5 West African countries, including Burkina Faso 3 times, Guinea, Mali 3 times, Mauritania, and the Gambia. So this is happening all over the place, you guys. Excuse me. They go into some details here too of each individual case, but I wanted to show you this last paragraph talking about a study on this. A year before, however, a study by Jonathan Caverly of the U.S. Naval War College and Jesse Savage of Trinity College Dublin in the Journal of Peace Research, analyzing data from 1970 to 2009, found, quote, a robust relationship between U.S. training of foreign militaries and military-backed coup attempts, despite the authors limiting their analysis to the international military education and training programs, quote, which explicitly focuses on promoting norms of civilian control. So even though they limited their research, they still found that there was a robust connection between the United States and these coup leaders. As I mentioned, a similar and kind of related story here pertaining to Mali, who was mentioned in that previous article as having 3 times been the subject of a coup by U.S. trained soldiers. This one is in foreign policy. Mali's military doubles down as the junta ousts Burkina Faso's president. West Africa is rocked by yet another coup as the military seizes power in, Ouagadougou. I'm so sorry I butchered that so bad, and holds on to control in Bamako. Mali's junta won't budge. Thousands of people took to the streets this month. We covered this a couple of weeks ago, objecting to the sanctions. Thousands of people took to the streets this month in Mali, heeding the government's call to protest economic sanctions leveled by the Economic Community of West Africa states. The sanctions were imposed over Mali's failure to transition to democratic rule. Yet Colonel Assimi Goïta, who has led 2 coups within 9 months, has used nationalist rhetoric to pin the blame for the country's dire prospects firmly on ECOWAS and France. Goïta urged Malians to defend their homeland against the punitive measures. ECOWAS had once again betrayed Africa, the National Workers' Union of Mali said. It has been easy for military rulers to cling firmly onto power amid rising public anger against France. The protests were a culmination of a deteriorating relationship between Mali's former colonial power, whose reputation across the Sahel has soured over the last year. Many Malians have been unhappy with the country's worsening security, with 1.2 million people facing hunger. In October 2021, hundreds of people gathered on the streets of Bamako, Mali's capital, to demonstrate against French troops who helped push jihadi groups out of the northern region. By the way, you guys, this is a little bit misframed, and I'm going to get into that in a sec. In 2013, but have since been accused of killing civilians. Malian security forces also killed more civilians than the jihadis in 2020, according to the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project. So, this is a little bit like the excuses that we use to remain in the Middle East, where we say we're fighting terrorism. That's what France has said there for a long time, yet reports say that they've actually killed quite a few civilians. And you know, we covered a few weeks ago how the U.S.'s involvement in the Middle East, and it's not just the U.S., we're allied with France and other countries too, but our involvement in the Middle East has worked to create more extremism and produce more terrorists. And I have no doubt that that is the same dynamic happening here. So I just want to correct that framing. They went on to correct it and basically say they have killed more civilians than jihadis in 2020. And I think that's probably true of other years as well. So in Western Africa, you guys, I think that Africa doesn't get as much attention as some of the other foreign policy stories that go on around the world. And yet we have quite a bit of involvement in Africa, all over Africa. A lot of it is private military contractors who are there, or foreign aid going to various groups of rebels and governments. So it doesn't get quite that same direct, like American troops on the ground in Iraq kind of coverage, right? But we have a lot of involvement in Africa still, as do colonial powers like France. So I wanted to draw some attention to that. And again, the caveat, you guys, I feel like I have to say this every time we talk foreign policy. I'm not like supporting the military government in Mali. Take a little bit of nuance when we talk foreign policy, okay? Oftentimes our involvement is a negative, even if the people we are opposing are not great. You just have to get used to that dynamic when you're talking about foreign policy. It's like when we talked about Ukraine earlier. It's like when we talk about the Middle East, on and on and on, right? I'm not endorsing all of these other governments and groups around the world. I'm pointing out that our actions tend to be a negative in these instances. So we have an amazing story here about Amazon. This is just... we actually have a couple of them, or a few of them, but this first one is just mind-boggling. I'm sure a number of you saw this, that they are indoctrinating high schoolers. So this is in Vice. Amazon paid for a high school course. Here's what it teaches. Quote, brainstorm ways you could motivate your employees other than large bonuses and high salaries. They're trying to figure out ways to keep employees happy for less. In 2019, Cajun High School in San Bernardino, California, started offering the Amazon Logistics and Business Management Pathway, a first-of-its-kind series of courses intended to help students get a head start in a career in logistics. Amazon donated $50,000 to provide the necessary materials to start the program, and apparently to do some redecorating. The classroom for the Pathways program is painted in Amazon's signature yellow with Amazon's leadership principles, customer obsession, bias for action, deliver results, written on the walls. The curriculum for the courses obtained by Motherboard by a public records request, which includes lesson plans on managing labor unions, making ethical decisions, and motivating employees, were written by a team of educators from Cajun High, Cal State University San Bernardino, and Chaffey College, a local community college, according to Corina Bursuk, a spokesperson for the San Bernardino Unified School District, with Amazon acting only as an industry expert and offering internships to students in the program. Quote, the goal is to help educators better understand how to shape the course curriculum so students graduate ready to be hired in that industry, Bursuk wrote via email in a response to a list of questions from Motherboard. But Amazon and other industry experts didn't write or oversee the curriculum. High school programs designed to prepare students for the workforce are not uncommon, and neither are programs that are sponsored by or otherwise have connections to companies that offer specific internships with those companies. But just because they're common doesn't necessarily mean they're providing unbiased information. One document obtained by Motherboard about the creation of the education program states that some of the goals for the people developing the curriculum is to make an education plan that will ignite student interest, create an intentional student, and provide an in-depth understanding and appreciation of the logistics community, but also to coach teachers on how to establish and develop an effective industry partnership with Amazon. Much of the curriculum is, quote, very, very pro-business, said Eric Nilsson, an economics professor at CSUSB, although he noted that that is typical of business courses in high schools and colleges across the country. Questions for an Amazon Pathways class called Business Management and Entrepreneurship asks students, why are mergers and acquisitions important to a company's overall growth? Oh, my Lord. And what can Uber do to ensure its competitors are not chipping away at its dominant market shares as a result of such bad press? So, oh my goodness, they're basically teaching the kids monopoly good in two different ways, right? Merger acquisition good, so that we can cut redundancy, as they call it, which it's just job loss. The reason mergers and acquisitions are good for companies is because it cuts their spending, because they cut jobs. It's not good for the rest of us. And then also endorsing Uber, basically engaging in anti-competitive behavior. That's remarkable. That's remarkable. And they ask the students, how can we motivate employees without paying them more? I mean, just think about the attitude that this instills in these kids' minds. And these are high schoolers. These aren't even college kids, you guys. These are fucking high schoolers that Amazon's doing this to. It's an absolute shame. It's a disgrace. Their rapacious attitudes towards absolutely everything. I mean, there's nothing they won't put their fingers in if they can't somehow move the needle even further in their direction. Like they're monopolizing fucking everything, and it's still not good enough. They still have to go indoctrinate children with their fucking nonsense. I mean, shame on Amazon in every possible way. We talk about them so much. The NLRB ruled that they violated laws in Bessemer, and now they have to have that election again because Amazon violated union busting laws, right? They illegal. We just found out they illegally fired an employee for organizing. Another one. There was 1 year. I mean, it's just, there's so much here that Amazon engages in that is reprehensible. And here's another one. This is in the Seattle Times. Sold by Amazon program shut down after Washington Attorney General's antitrust investigation. Amazon is shutting down its Sold by Amazon program after an investigation from Washington Attorney General Bob Ferguson found it was anti-competitive and violated antitrust laws. The company engaged in unlawful price fixing and unreasonably restrained competition in order to maximize its own profits, according to the lawsuit and consent decree filed Wednesday in King County Superior Court. As a result of the investigation, Amazon will shut down the program nationwide and pay $2.25 million to the Attorney General's office, as well as provide annual updates on its compliance with antitrust laws. The funds will go toward antitrust enforcement. The program ran from 2018 to 2020 when Amazon suspended it for reasons unrelated to the investigation, according to a spokesperson for the company. It was a small program offering another tool to businesses. The spokesperson said, and did not include all of the third-party sellers on the e-commerce platform. I want to note that if they had to pay out $2.25 million, that was what they managed to like price gouge out of this situation. That's a small program to Amazon, and that's just what they were caught for. Who knows how much they actually managed to extract from this price gouging scheme and this anti-competitive behavior. It's remarkable how reliably on the wrong side of everything this fucking company is. It's just remarkable. What's even perhaps more remarkable is that they are deemed a progressive or liberal company by the mainstream press and by a whole lot of people out there who think that because, I'll say again, they say because they start at $15 an hour, they must be progressive. But often the jobs that they're hiring for at 15 are locally paid low to mid 20s. Those are warehouse jobs. So they're dragging wages down while they portray themselves to the public as though they are raising wages up. It's brilliant PR, unfortunately. It's brilliant propaganda. They've managed to completely fool, seemingly, the whole fucking public outside of the left. But they are reliably on the wrong side of everything. They are reliably rapacious and greedy. And there doesn't seem to be a form of gross behavior that they're unwilling to engage in. So shame on Amazon on a number of levels. Also, they were caught lobbying. I'm sure a number of you know Steve Ricchetti. They were caught lobbying. He's in the Biden administration. He's the, I believe, White House chancellor. High up. He's got a direct line to the president. And his brother is part of a big old lobbying group. Richetti's also done the revolving door. He's been a lobbyist as well. His brother took $90,000 from Amazon just last quarter of last year alone. You think that's not influencing? I mean, come on, guys. Come on. And do you know what the liberals by the way, when this was reported, do you know how the liberals responded online? They were like, oh, that's not that much money. Everyone does it. That's their fucking response. Nice. Lovely. That's the state of politics in this country right there. Shame on Amazon. Shame on everybody in power who does their bidding and takes their fucking money. And that includes the Ricchetti brothers and Biden. And I hope that they're held to account in every avenue that we cover. I hope that Bessemer succeeds in their unionization efforts. I hope that other suits like this for anti-competitive behavior go forward. I hope they are forced out of schools. It's outrageous. It's egregious. It's disgusting. And I have an article here to back up that last point that I made. This is Politico. Biden tied lobbying firms raked in the dough during his first year. Shops that employed former aides to the current president saw massive increases in clients and fees in 2021. This isn't so much specifically about Amazon, but Washington's top lobbying firms reported record lobbying revenues in 2021, and perhaps no one benefited more than lobbying shops with ties to President Joe Biden and his administration. At Putala Strategies, a firm run by Chris Putala, a former aide to Biden from his time on the Senate Judiciary Committee, annual lobbying revenues soared from $1.3 million in 2020 to $4 million in 2021, an increase of more than 200%, according to a review of lobbying disclosures. Putala signed more than a dozen new clients in 2021, including the powerful drug lobby, the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, and the company behind the Keystone XL pipeline, both of which were fighting unfavorable policy proposals from Biden. That's nearly as many as the one-man firm signed in the entire decade prior. Putala signed no new clients between 16 and 20 when his former boss was no longer in office, according to lobbying disclosures. So give me a break with this. It's all on the up and up. They're buying influence, you guys, and they're not even trying to hide it. Lobbying disclosures show that throughout the year, Putala lobbied the White House or the executive office of the president on behalf of several prominent corporate clients, including T-Mobile and Comcast. Putala also lobbied the White House on behalf of several tech trade associations, the Entertainment Software Association and the NCTA, the Internet and Television Association, as well as the U.S. subsidiary of the Dutch chip maker ASML. Putala did not immediately respond to a request for comment. I'm stunned. Jeff Ricchetti, the brother of top Biden advisor Steve Ricchetti, saw lobbying revenues continue to climb for his firm. Ricchetti incorporated a trend that began in 2020 when Biden became the presumptive Democratic presidential nominee. So what do you know? These two Democratic lobbyists see no new clients under Trump, and then all of a sudden they're swarming in new clients under Biden. And yet people out there will try to convince themselves that this is not about buying influence. Ricchetti's firm brought in $3.2 million in lobbying fees in 2021, up from $1.3 million in 2020, a 150% increase. Ricchetti did not report lobbying the White House for any of his clients last quarter, having formally sworn off lobbying the West Wing amid backlash over a growing contingent of family members joining the Biden administration. And if you believe that separation is in any way applicable, I have a bridge to sell you. They like to, it's like how Pete formally separated from his dark money group, right? I'm sure now there's no connection between the money that group, again, got a bridge in Brooklyn for you if you believe any of that shit. So shame on Amazon for all of the above. Shame on the Biden administration for participating in it. And, I hope that we can find some justice against this horrific company in whatever ways possible of all the avenues that are kind of up in the air currently. So I have a clip here to show you guys about a potential housing bubble. I say potential. We've never solved the bubble. We just keep creating more bubbles. But this is a guy who has predicted previous bubbles, who is saying that we're on not only one, but multiple bubbles, and that it could be absolutely devastating. This is Crystal Ball on Breaking Points, who went into some of those details. So this is a portion of her monologue from the other day on this prediction about a potential housing bubble.
Who was right about both the dot-com bubble and then right again about the housing bubble, is now saying we ain't seen nothing yet. Jeremy Grantham, British investor who has a near impeccable record where such things are concerned, is sounding the alarms. He believes the U.S. right now is facing down not one, not two, but 3.5 super bubbles, all set to burst with potentially catastrophic consequences. In a post titled, "Let the Wild Rumpus Begin," Grantham lays out his case that we are currently in super bubble territory in housing, in stocks, in commodities and a half bubble in bonds. Effectively, when the Fed was handing out free cash, there was a rush for the rich to put it somewhere, anywhere really. This led to record-breaking stock gains, massive spikes in asset prices, and everything from art to wine to yachts to fancy trees to NFTs to fake real estate in the metaverse. Closer to home, well, it led to huge spikes in home prices, with investors rushing in to buy single-family homes and pricing ordinary home buyers out of the market altogether. Crypto has been another major beneficiary of this exuberance. The huge spike in cryptocurrency value coincided with the Fed's extraordinary moves to prop up the market during COVID. And now that the Fed has signaled their intent to change course, crypto was among the first assets to see a huge drop. Bitcoin jumped up 305% back in 2020 under the easy money regime, but over the past few months, it is down by about half. Overall, in just one day, the cryptocurrency market lost $130 billion of its value. According to Grantham, the signs of these super bubbles right now are everywhere. Housing costs are at the highest multiple of family income in history, meaning that homes are less affordable than they have ever been before, including before the great housing bubble crash. The stock market soared during the pandemic, even as millions filed for unemployment and pulled the family minivan into a modern-day breadline, fueling a belief that nothing could ever cause the market to fall. And commodities like oil, metals, and food are broadly overpriced, leading to inflation and stressing real incomes right as the bottom could be set to fall out. Take a look at this. Grantham also argues that we've already run through the traditional life cycles of the super bubble. He writes that in past super bubbles, shortly before they burst, they actually go through a period of acceleration, which we saw mostly in 2020 and early in 2021, when the NASDAQ skyrocketed 105% from its COVID low. Next, the most speculative assets, things like crypto, begin to fall even as more traditional blue chip stocks continue to perform well. The final phase he describes is the psychological dynamic that I mentioned before, a sort of quasi-religious belief that the market can only possibly go up. By the way, that was kind of true so long as the Fed was pumping trillions into the markets. But now, that music has stopped. Looking at history, previous super bubbles have all ended, of course, with economic devastation for the masses. These bubbles caused the Great Depression. They caused the massive Japanese crash that led to the lost decades, the dot-com crash, and the Great Recession after the housing bubble crash. If Grantham is correct, we are in an even worse position than any of those scenarios because we're dealing with super bubbles in almost everything.
So this has the potential to be absolutely devastating if this guy's correct. And, this is a cycle. We seem to have these every decade or so. We had a crash over COVID. It's an indication that we have never actually fixed the systemic causes of those crashes and have instead groveled back to the very capitalists whose greed is one of the root causes of and driving forces that leads to these crashes. So, I I hope like hell the guy's wrong because it sounds like a Great Depression on steroids if he's right. But that is certainly worth noting and worth keeping an eye on. And, the Biden administration, we've talked before about how they're not handling the rising prices the right way at all. They're not diagnosing it correctly. Neither is the mainstream press, for whatever that's worth, who seem to be diagnosing it as a demand side inflation. And it's nothing close. It's corporate greed, you guys. Let's just call it what it is. It's corporate greed and price gouging that is causing a large portion of the increase in prices. So when you misdiagnose the problem from the jump, then apply policy that wouldn't even work had you diagnosed it properly, you're just in a very muddled place. There's not much sense to what the Biden administration is aiming to do about any of this. So if this guy is correct, we're set for a devastating crash to come. I again very much hope that he's not, but it's worth covering. On a somewhat similar related topic here, I want to show you guys. Gosh, I keep doing that. Here we go. This is a piece from Stephanie Kelton in her Substack. And if you're not following Stephanie's work, I really encourage you to. The Deficit Myth was her best-selling book. It goes over some of the basics of modern monetary theory for beginners, describes what a fiat currency really kind of is. she responded here to a clip of Jon Stewart, who had on former Federal Reserve president in Kansas City, Thomas Hoenig. And there was a clip that kind of went around online, and Stephanie is responding to it. So I'm going to read here the start of this. Last week, Jon Stewart recorded a podcast with the former president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, Thomas Hoenig. The conversation drew a lot of attention on so-called finance Twitter, where lots of folks piled on to ridicule Hoenig for arguing that monetary policy has been a major driver of inequality over the last decade or so. But the part of the conversation that really went viral had to do with money, where it comes from, and government debt. This mashup of their conversation is making the rounds on Facebook. And I downloaded this so I can show you guys this portion that she showed here. So this is a few minutes of their back and forth, and then we'll come back and discuss.
Currency that has been sort of created out of thin air has been added into this economy through the Fed. What would you put as a figure? Would it be 6 trillion? Is that too much?
It would be, 6 trillion in terms of deposits with the banks and currency, be 6 to 7 trillion.
Okay. That they're just injecting into it sort of out of nothing.
Out of nothing. They're the central bank of the United States. Now, think about it. The central bank of the United States is the only institution on earth that can create dollars and pay for assets out of nothing.
It's alchemy. They're Rumpelstiltskin.
Well, yes, in that sense, yes. And they've been given that authority by the Congress of the United States for purposes of dealing with crises, for example.
What's to stop us from creating I used to make fun of Paul Krugman for his idea of $1 trillion coin, now I feel myself saying, hey man, well, let's just get $10 trillion coins, give one to China, one to Europe. Are we square? Good. And then we start again because this whole thing seems manufactured.
Okay, who receives the money?
All the people that own the debt of the United States. So that money would be received by China, by Europe, and all the debt holders.
Okay, all you're doing there is changing one debt for another. Because the printing of the money is a liability, is a debt of the Federal Reserve System. That dollar, that liability that the Fed created, it's now owed to China.
No, we give it to, what I'm saying is we're giving it to them now and saying, we don't owe you that anymore. Here it is.
Yeah, but they have, what do they have? What did they get?
They have $1 trillion.
$1 trillion of Fed liabilities.
Of
money.
Money that we printed, yeah.
Right. And that's a liability of the Federal Reserve. That's
debt. And then they forgive themselves. And they just burn it.
Then they just say, you're okay, we like you, good luck. I don't think China's in the business of doing us any favors right now. And I don't think Europe is either for that kind of, because why would they take the loss? Why would they take the loss?
I guess I'm confused as, if we can print money, you just said we're the only...
We can buy an asset.
Okay.
Any asset by printing money. That is,
But you can't pay debt by printing money.
You can buy debt by printing money.
So what if we just buy back our debt?
Well, because all you're doing is...
I feel like you're having trouble. It's like talking to a monkey.
You're
like talking to a monkey and trying to figure out, how do I communicate with this monkey? I don't know what to do.
No. I totally get it's confusing.
Yeah.
But remember, creating money, it means that the Federal Reserve creates a liability, debt, to buy debt or buy other assets.
Right.
Okay, so if they go out and say, well, to China, we want the government debt, and they say, okay, and we say, we'll give you our deposit, our money.
That we've printed.
Right. China says, fine. What kind of interest are you going to pay me? It's just another form of government debt. Am I making sense?
It makes sense in the make-believe world of Conjuring. Like, there is a certain part of this that all feels like a mirage to some extent. Right. So it's, when you think about fundamentals, right? So when I think about the fundamentals of the banking system, it makes sense to me. You have a central clearinghouse that their business model is, I'm going to trust you with my savings. You're going to give me interest on that. And you're going to make a little money on that by loaning that money out to somebody else for a little bit more money.
Right.
It's a business model that makes sense.
Right.
When we start to get into I'm printing money to buy bonds to artificially keep those interest rates low, it makes less sense. So it's hard for me not to think of, well, why can't we just buy back our own debt so that we owe it to ourselves? And if you owe it to yourself, then it no longer can be weaponized by a foreign power or even by us, because you can create a different paradigm of what that debt looks like.
Right.
So it's hard for me when sometimes the rules of the Fed are explained. It's a little like saying, yes, you can levitate, but you cannot spin around. Do you know what I mean? It all seems sort of fake.
Well, it's a fiduciary system. It's all faith-based, right?
Oh, my Lord.
Yes, you got to have confidence in that currency, in that dollar, because there's nothing backing. There's no gold backing.
So it's in some ways, it's a mass delusion.
Well, that's a harsh word, but so long as you have faith, yes. Well, you might see it today,
right?
In terms of with all this printing, you see these cryptocurrencies, these bitcoins,
right,
which are basically virtual currencies.
Where do I even start with that one? My goodness. Like, I understand why this was Stephanie Kelton and Rohan Gray did a whole piece on this trying to break down the whole conversation. It's like, what the fuck is going on here? So first of all, I want to address Stuart's seeming confusion about it's a sort of debatable term, but for the sake of simplicity, monetary sovereignty, and how currency issuing governments work. Yes, it is a bit arbitrary, John. Like it is, it's that's what sovereignty is. So I think there's a bit of confusion about that simple point that the government that imposes the tax is then creating value for the currency, and that is somewhat arbitrary. That's backed up by the sovereignty of the government. Okay, but like Honig seems to think that we can't move the numbers around on a balance sheet to pay back our debts, and he seems to just kind of misunderstand what that would actually mean, what John is asking would actually mean. So this is Stephanie's take on it in response to the clip that I just showed you on her Substack piece. At this point, Stewart and Honig spend some time talking about how the Federal Reserve experimented with quantitative easing after the 2007-2008 financial crisis, and how the Fed restarted its bond buying program in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Honig understands that Congress had to act, but he doesn't like the fact that the Fed bought up so many U.S. government bonds, which he sees as printing money to enable the government to borrow trillions at very low interest rates. And this is where things go off the rails. And she continues down here. She has a Stewart piece, and you can see Stephanie's like, he's so close, and Rohan goes into it. There was one paragraph here that I wanted to show you guys, though, because it I think gets at the crux of the issue. I apologize. Here we go. So this is Stephanie actually talking about one time where she met with Honig and Warren Mosler. She says, I apologize if that text is too small, but I'll read it for you guys. This is Stephanie's transcript. This reminds me of the time I had lunch with Honig. He was president of the Kansas City Fed, and I was on faculty at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Matt Forstater and Randy Ray were also on faculty. So Warren Mosler happened to be in town, and we all went to lunch with Tom. I remember the China issue coming up and Mosler explaining that paying back China just requires a few computer keystrokes. As Warren put it, we just debit their securities account at the Fed and credit their reserve account. Warren was using the language of a financial insider, and Honig didn't disagree with any of it. But of course, Jon Stewart doesn't have that language. I wish he did, because it would have been interesting to see how Honig would have responded in a situation like that. If Stewart had been able to frame the question using the language of central bank monetary operations, where he couldn't pretend not to get it. And then Rohan says, right, and if Stewart got this point at the moment, then the question to ask here would have been, are you really saying that there would be no difference to the public debate, to the public discourse, to how this gets reported in the New York Times, to how presidential candidates speak in presidential debates? Are you really saying there would be no difference at all tomorrow if we retired the whole national debt and replaced it with interest earning money, where the only interest we pay was the interest rate the Fed wanted to pay? No bondholders, no primary dealers, no grandchildren. Are you really saying that would make no difference to the public discourse, to the policymaking process? I can't imagine Honig claiming that it wouldn't change anything. That really kind of gets at the crux of why MMT is so important, or one of the primary reasons why MMT is so important. The effect it has on political discourse. MMT basically takes a lot of things that are currently economic. This is an oversimplification, so forgive me. But in many ways, it takes things that are currently economic conversations and it acknowledges that they're really just political decisions. So it shifts the blame from some sort of natural economic thing to the policymakers. It points the finger at the actual decision makers here. And that's what I think Rohan was just getting at there. Stephanie is spot on that if John just had a little bit more technical knowledge, or technical language to ask that question in a way that Honig couldn't have resisted, we might have had a different conversation there. But I thought that was very interesting. Stephanie always doing fantastic work on these economic issues, as is Rohan Gray. If you guys are not following their work, I really encourage you to. If you have not read The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton, I really encourage you to. And just as a side note, you guys, shout out to Jon Stewart for actually talking about this. Hardly anybody who does a podcast or does any political commentary or social commentary wants to talk about this stuff. I get that it can be kind of dry and boring to talk economics and banking policy and inflation and shit like that. I really get it, you guys. I get it. I happen to be kind of passionate about it. So for me, it's easier, but I understand why a lot of people don't necessarily engage with that content in the same way that they engage with hot button political content. So shout out to Jon Stewart for covering this and bringing attention to it. I wish the conversation would have gone a little bit better in the same way that Stephanie kind of described in that last quote that I gave you guys. But, good to bring this to the forefront either way. Just understand that shifting numbers around on a balance sheet is exactly what it sounds like. And yet it could have all the impact in the world on our political rhetoric and what we're able to kind of fight for without having disingenuous resistance from conservatives and neoliberals. So good on Jon Stewart and good on Stephanie and Rohan for replying to that. And I hope like hell, maybe John will have Stephanie or Rohan on. I think that would be absolutely fantastic to put his the platform he has, give them his megaphone and let them try to explain this a little bit better. And, I think it's important for the public to understand. So if you don't understand modern monetary theory, go to realprogressives.org. We have all sorts of content there, you guys. Educational content. Watch the Macro and Cheese podcast from our founder and CEO, Steve Grumbine. He's always diving into economic and political issues from an MMT lens. We have all sorts of articles there on MMT, educational content, etc. Really important that you understand how federal finance works. So want to get into some labor issues today, you guys. There's this push of strikes and unionization efforts across the country, and I have been inspired to be able to bring you, a number of stories along those lines every single week. We're going to start, surprise, surprise to regular viewers, we're going to start with a More Perfect Union clip. Once again, if you're not following them, please do, you guys. They are... I don't bring them to you every week because I want to fill the air. I bring them to you because of how fantastic they are. So please go follow More Perfect Union if you are not already. This first one is about the Cheesecake Factory and how they have abused workers throughout the pandemic. We'll watch this, come back and discuss.
The largest employers of low-wage workers in America is a company you've probably never even heard of, a private equity firm called Roark Capital. Roark owns Inspire Brands, which employs more than 650,000 people at franchises of Dunkin' Donuts, Sonic, Arby's, Jimmy John's, Baskin-Robbins, Buffalo Wild Wings, and, until recently, the Cheesecake Factory.
The Cheesecake Factory did nothing for us during the pandemic.
They're really trimming as much money as they can out of us, like hourly staff. And this is meanwhile when the company is making more money than ever.
In April 2020, when restaurants around the country were in crisis due to the pandemic, Roark Capital bought a controlling stake in the Cheesecake Factory for $200 million. Just 1 year later, in June 2021, Roark cashed out.
So Roark more than doubled its money in just over a year, or made a $257 million profit.
During that year, while Roark made massive profits, workers were devastated by an astonishing lack of safety, staffing shortages, and poverty wages. Many were forced to work 12-hour days, 6 days a week, with little to no COVID precautions. We spoke to Cheesecake Factory workers to find out what happens to a business when a private equity firm like Roark Capital takes over.
How the company has responded has been to prioritize their profits over their people.
They didn't care about the workers' health, they didn't care about the guests' health either. It was just really disheartening and honestly kind of disgusting to see.
They would allow more indoor seating than the CDC recommended. They would allow indoor dining even when the pandemic was in surges because they didn't want to lose that profit.
You know, a lot of people did not feel safe coming in. A lot of people felt afraid to take their sick days off because we were still understaffed then. There's definitely a lot of pressure to come in even if you were ill. The state of California offered workers 10 days of paid time off in case a worker got sick or was facing side effects from getting the vaccine. They did not tell anyone about this. They did the legal minimum in posting a notification on it in very small text, hidden away with a lot of other old irrelevant posters. So the vast majority of my coworkers, including myself, didn't know about this until we actively looked into it. I feel like they didn't want to tell us because that would require paying us for a time off, and recently they have been doing everything they can to claw that away from us.
You know, I get $9 an hour here. I know there are a lot of states that are still at $213. But when I worked in North Carolina, it was still $213. So again, if the company can pay you $213, they're gonna pay you $213. And as a tipped employee, you will never see a raise.
I have seen a lot of injuries and a lot more risky behavior at work because of how busy it is. Things like, you know, servers or bussers, you know, running with hot drinks or running with very full plates. We end up dropping these more, so, you know, shards of ceramic and glass go everywhere. We all have to stop and clean it up. We have so much pressure on the outside to keep, you know, our flow going.
There's a high turnover rate with new hires just seeing the workload for the pay and seeing that it's not quite matching up. The Cheesecake Factory has more than doubled its to-go sales since even before the shutdown. Every location is averaging about $3 million in to-go sales only a year.
Roark Capital got its name and philosophy from the main character Howard Roark in Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead, a dystopian novel championing unfettered self-interest in the name of individualism over collective well-being.
Ooh, The Fountainhead. Mom, isn't that book the Bible of right-wing losers?
But unfettered self-interest from billionaire venture capitalists creates a real-life dystopia for millions of workers across the country.
So private equity is investment firms buying up companies, and their sole reason for buying up these companies is to grow cash flow for themselves as much as possible over a period of 4 to 6 years. The company that sort of jumps to mind is a company called Roark Capital. Roark Capital bragged about how it had helped kill the Raise the Wage Act, which would have established a $15 federal minimum wage and ended sub-minimum wages for tipped workers.
Roark employs more than 1 million workers, 650,000 workers in fast food alone, and they are the second largest food conglomerate in the country. A 2020 report found that a number of Roark Capital-owned fast food chains, including Dunkin' Donuts, Sonic, Arby's, and Hardee's, had among the highest number of workers relying on food stamps and Medicaid in multiple states.
There's a lot of money being made by investors and higher-ups that we're not seeing, even though we're the ones who are constantly putting in the hard work, going the extra mile.
We're taking the moment to tell them that, this isn't okay, and that we are going to exercise our rights as workers here, and that we do deserve better and we do deserve a living wage.
We're realizing you need us more so in a lot of ways than we need you. I think they're a little afraid of it, certainly, especially with all the things happening with Starbucks workers now. And
we know this place could be better. We want not only the guests to be happy, but for the employees to be happy as well, to not be so overworked, to not be so overburdened, to have like pride in the place that we work at.
I mean, right now, the CEO makes almost 300 times what the average worker makes. You know, that's a ridiculous sort of dichotomy. Give us all a little slice.
Fantastic work as always. Regular viewers know I've gone on ad nauseum about the restaurant industry. I've worked fast food and kitchens for most of my employment career. I'm still a student, so I've that's the work I've done has largely been food industry stuff, and I have firsthand experience of how horrible it can be and how horrible it can be for my coworkers out front dealing with customers. It's just not a fun industry, and it's also an industry that has slimmer profit margins than others, which can lead to even more rapacious behavior than usual. And, shame on the Cheesecake Factory there for exploiting workers like that, especially during a pandemic and putting them at the risks that they're being put at. Good on More Perfect Union for revealing that. In another story of corporate greed, this is about Kroger, and they are up to their same nonsense. I feel like I cover Kroger like every fucking week. Are they like way worse than most? I don't know. It seems like there's something with Kroger every week. This is in the Daily Poster. It's by Andrew Perez. Kroger goes to Washington. The grocery behemoth taps Washington's tip sheet industry to spin away the headlines about striking workers and poverty wages. So they're basically buying good coverage is the deal here, guys. In recent weeks, Kroger has faced a rash of negative news reports about its employees' working and living conditions, drawing new scrutiny from lawmakers and seen thousands of workers go on strike in Colorado, all as the company lobbies on union rights legislation and bankrolls corporate trade associations trying to kill it. That strike, by the way, was successful. They did get some concessions in Colorado. Ended just a few days ago. Now, amid the potential for congressional hearings and a federal crackdown, the grocery giant did what so many other corporate behemoths do when they're feeling the heat. Pay big bucks to run counter-programming, claiming it offers great pay and great benefits in a Beltway tip sheet read by Washington insiders. The DC tip sheets industry, which includes daily email newsletters like Politico, Playbook, Axios AM, and Punchbowl News, may seem obscure, but it serves a special purpose in media. The newsletters are the first thing anyone who's anyone in Washington reads every morning. Their tidbits and scoops help populate cable news shows with gossipy, insidery content that drives the day's coverage, and their journalists are often brought on TV to contextualize the news for viewers. Because of their place in the DC ecosystem, the tip sheets also serve a more insidious purpose. They have become a reliable avenue for corporate interests to inject their money and viewpoints straight into the political conversation, and Kroger having plenty of reasons to do so lately. Closing stores during a pandemic, cutting workers during a pandemic, mistreating their workers during a pandemic, on and on. I feel like I've covered Kroger almost every freaking week. There's always like a local story about them or something like this. Their CEO boasting about using the increase in prices to gouge customers even further. I mean, like the extent of it is hard to even fathom. But this is how they get away with it, you guys. This is how they get away with it. And it's not limited to Kroger. They know that there are a lot of media outlets who get a lot of attention and viewership, whose sole job is to engage in stenography for them. And so they go inject their narratives in the right places, and they know that day's coverage is in large part just going to be a regurgitation of their PR points and what their PR team came up with. So this is a sort of a proximity to power in the media that nobody else is afforded outside of these gigantic corporations and banks and military contractors and on the usual list of suspects, right? So shame on Kroger for this one and all the other shit that they've done over the last year that I've been covering. Another one we have, this is in Vice, and it's about REI workers. Unionizing REI workers want their, quote, progressive employer to pay a living wage. Another example, you guys, of a company pretending to be liberal or progressive or worker-friendly or what have you, and not being so at all. Well, one thing I keep coming back to is the fact that REI prides itself on being a great workplace, but why is it that none of us are making a living wage? REI managers began morning shifts this week at the company's flagship store in Manhattan by reading aloud a series of talking points about the company's stance against unionization. Kate Denon, the sales specialist in the camp department at REI's Manhattan store, said managers called the union a third party and claimed it would be bad for REI. Quote, our main communication from the company about the union drive has been through morning huddles, she said. The manager reads the same opening statement. Denon said workers have responded by saying, what do you mean a union would be bad for us? And they're like, we'll get this info for you soon. Last Friday, 116 employees at the Soho store in Manhattan filed for a union election with the Retail Warehouse and Department Store Union, the first of the retailer's 15,000 employees nationwide to seek to form a union. REI has long cultivated an image as one of the nation's most progressive retailers, shutting down stores on Black Friday for the past 7 years and offering workers annual incentives that kick in when stores hit sales targets. But REI workers in Soho have many concerns that reflect the general precarity of working a non-union job in the retail industry. In particular, they want full-time status and benefits, COVID-19 protections, and guaranteed hours after the holiday season. Denon told Motherboard that despite working 40 hours a week, she and many of her coworkers are classified as part-time and will not receive the healthcare benefits that come with full-time status until they're working at the company for a year. She says workers at her store are frequently told, we don't know, when they ask about how they can be converted to full-time status sooner. There's a lot of accountability and transparency issues, she said. New hires at the Manhattan store start at roughly $18.90 an hour. MIT's living wage calculator says a living wage in New York City is $21.77 an hour for someone without children. Quote, one thing I keep coming back to is the fact that REI prides itself on being a great workplace, a leader of the outdoors, but why is it that none of us are making a living wage? Denon said, explaining why she and her coworkers decided to unionize. Why do you have to work 40 hours a week for 12 months to get health benefits? Why is there no guarantee of hours after the holiday season? These are very basic things that REI has gotten away with not doing, despite the facade of being a progressive liberal company. Great coverage there. Shame on REI. A lot of retailers engage in this kind of stuff. They will, give a sort of performative concession like closing on Black Friday, and then, portray themselves as though they're progressive, and behind the scenes they're engaging in all this nefarious nonsense to try to further exploit their workers, deny their workers basic things like a living wage or guaranteed hours or health care. So as with all these stories, you guys, I encourage you all to get involved with local labor organizing. If there are companies in your area that are on strike, please do not cross the picket line. If there are unionization efforts in your area, do what you can to support. If there's mutual aid to support striking workers in your area, do what you can to support. If there are protests or demonstrations going on, I encourage you to get involved. And one of the reasons is I'm about to show you guys a map that actually, I never say this covering politics, warms my fucking heart, you guys. This is such a fantastic, I would say story, but it's really not even a story. It's just an ongoing thing. This is a map of all of the open Starbucks union filings. You can find this on unionelections.org, and they show that those three stores in New York have sparked quite a chain of unionization attempts from Starbucks, numerous in my home state here of Washington. A couple of those stores are in Seattle, I was reading about. One in Oregon, one in California, on throughout the East Coast as well. You guys can see that this has not just been a couple of stores. It seems to have a snowball effect, and I'm hopeful that all of those efforts will be successful, or as many as possible. Because when those workers can demonstrate that their work environment and their compensation has improved, the arguments made by the company become less and less relevant and carry less and less weight in future fights with other employees. So this shit works, you guys. Labor organizing works. Strikes work. Unionization efforts work. And this is a way we can actually somewhat tip the scales of power in our favor. It's never enough and it's never fast enough. And I understand the progressive tendency to kind of constantly be in this state of despair. You know what I mean? Even when a little good thing happens. But I hope that some of you can find some hope and inspiration in the fact that this labor organizing push is genuinely working. Those Kroger employees in Colorado got some concessions. Like, we have seen this work, okay? And this Starbucks map is another example of that. I encourage you all to get involved in your local labor organizing. You can go to More Perfect Union. They have all sorts of resources to put you in touch with local mutual aid groups for striking workers, things like that. So I just encourage everybody to get involved wherever you can with the labor push, because this is really something, and the media does not want you to know how important or how big this is and can be. So please do your part to make sure it's as big as possible and get involved where you can. I'm sorry. Got myself all confused there. This is the story I want to go to. This is in Democracy Now! And this is about how Cuba has outdone us on vaccines and COVID. And this is despite the blockade, decades-long blockade that we have had on Cuba that has devastated their capacity to do any number of things and acquire any number of necessities. Cuba, despite that blockade, despite the embargo, has managed to pump out more doctors per capita than any other country in the world. A lot of those doctors travel the world to work with Doctors Without Borders, groups like this. Cuba also has developed a number of COVID vaccines despite that blockade and the U.S.'s best efforts to keep them from succeeding in these kinds of endeavors. And it looks like the global South is now basically turning to Cuba because they know that the United States and Europe are instead going to grovel to big pharma and try to maintain their monopoly over profits instead of trying to vaccinate the world. Just to give you guys a quick number, I don't know how up to date this is, but a couple of days ago, I saw that the entire continent of Africa is something like 7% vaccinated. So that's because we refuse to pass the TRIPS waiver. That's because we prioritize Pfizer and Moderna and Johnson & Johnson's profits over the well-being of human beings and over attempting to end a pandemic, okay? Again, this is in Democracy Now! Despite U.S. embargo, Cuba aims to share homegrown vaccine with Global South. A 60-year U.S. embargo that prevents U.S.-made products from being exported to Cuba has forced the small island nation to develop its own COVID-19 vaccines and rely on open-source designs for life-saving medical equipment such as ventilators. We speak to leading Cuban scientist Dr. Mitchell Valdez Sosa about how massive mobilization helped produce 3 original vaccines that have proven highly effective against the coronavirus. Quote, in a moment that the whole world was mobilizing to face this tremendous menace that was killing people around the world, the U.S. administration did not lift any of the 400 sanctions that were slapped on Cuba during the Trump administration, plus this decades-long embargo, said Valdez Sosa, director of the Cuban Center for Neuroscience. Medicines and vaccines are not a commodity. It's not something to get rich with. It's something to save people's lives. And then they go on to show the transcript of that conversation. I just wanted to make sure you guys had the details here. So this is the country that we villainize, you guys. And I'm not here to fucking simp for the Cuban government. Again, I'll give the caveat when we're talking about international issues. We are constantly the bad guy. That does not mean anyone else is inherently a good guy, okay? But Cuba on medical issues, certainly one of the world leaders. That, like, as I mentioned earlier, they lead the world in doctors per capita. It also means their education system's got to be pretty fucking excellent, doesn't it? And yet in the United States, the sort of picture that you get when Cuba is brought up is one of despair, one of struggle, and that socialism is bad and all this, these CIA talking points. So Cuba now basically showing the United States how to actually respond to a pandemic by attempting to provide treatment options and vaccination options to the rest of the world, trying to use your medical expertise to help the rest of the world. And by the way, Cuba is also engaging not just in sending vaccines directly, like producing and sending vaccines around the world. They're also looking to provide equipment and expertise to other countries to produce the vaccines around the world, which is what we refuse to do with the TRIPS waiver. So they're really trying to get this stuff out as quick as possible and provide the world with the options of vaccination as quickly as possible. One other thing I wanted to mention about this, you guys. They are like 93%. 93% of the Cuban population is at least partially vaccinated. Now, why might that be the case compared to the United States? Well, first of all, the trust in institutions is probably a lot higher in a country that has not, groveled to those institutions for decades. In the United States, there's no reason to trust Big Pharma. There's no real reason to trust the FDA or the CDC. And that's because of the powerful, the rotating door corruption and all this stuff, right? There's no reason to trust them. In Cuba, that's a little bit different. So there's probably less institutional distrust down there that would lead to the vaccine hesitancy. They also have universal health care. And we know that the most trusted person for most people when it comes to medical advice is their personal doctor. So in Cuba, they actually have access to their personal doctor, whereas in the United States, for a very significant portion of this country, that is a serious problem. So why might people be turning to a Facebook friend for medical information? Because they don't have access to a fucking doctor, because our healthcare system is dystopian. So there are a number of reasons why Cuba has such a high vaccination rate. It's also just easier to vaccinate people quicker when you have a centralized healthcare system. So there are a number of reasons here, you guys, that Cuba has shown us that their healthcare system, their education system, and their decision-making surrounding public health crises is significantly superior to the United States. So I wanted to bring that story to you all. And it seems like in the US, we have this mentality of like, well, we're always doing the best we can. No, we're not. Cuba just showed us that despite this embargo, for decades-long embargo and hundreds of sanctions, despite it, they were still able to produce a number of successful vaccines. And they're actually trying to help the rest of the world with those vaccines, okay? Now, as I've said with COVID stuff in the past, you guys, I hate how inflammatory all of the rhetoric around a public health issue has gotten. I support any and all forms. I support early treatment options. I support anything that makes it less likely that people are going to spread this stuff, get this stuff, die from this stuff. Anything that can help on any of those steps, I'm in favor of. Please mask up, please distance, please take it seriously, please treat your community with the respect that you would want to be treated with if you had comorbidities or if you were living with someone who had comorbidities. Take it seriously, get yourself vaccinated if you're not vaccinated, support the early treatment options, pressure governments to go with the TRIPS waiver and get vaccines all around the world. We need to take every step we can to get rid of a pandemic that has just been absolutely devastating to the entire world. So good on Cuba, shame on the US, shame on Pfizer and Moderna, and our propensity to grovel towards Big Pharma instead of trying to vaccinate the world. Somewhat related story here about healthcare and health insurance, you guys. This is Wendell Potter in his Substack talking about record profits for the health insurance industry. While United Health reports $24 billion in profits, Americans face 200% increases in out-of-pocket over the last decade. No insurer has ever made that kind of money in U.S. history. For those that don't know, Wendell used to be a pharmaceutical executive. He was with Cigna and I believe one other company. I'm pretty sure he was with Cigna, though, for a while. After his career as an executive, he became it's not like whistleblower, but he sort of shares his experience and why he supports single-payer healthcare compared to the industry that he engaged in for so long. Just days after a Commonwealth Fund report showed that American families are sending health insurance companies more and more of their income every year, even as their deductibles skyrocket, the country's biggest insurer reported massive 2021 profits and told investors to expect even higher 2022 profits. United Health on Wednesday reported 2021 profits of $24 billion on revenue of $287.6 billion. Executives told Wall Street they expect United will be the first insurer to take in more than $300 billion from its customers this year. Instead of giving its health plan customers relief from ever increasing out-of-pocket requirements, United spent $5 billion last year buying back its own shares of stock, a gimmick that boosts the value of shares and makes shareholders richer. United also paid shareholders $5.3 billion in dividends in 2021. No insurer has ever made that kind of money in U.S. history. It's even more notable when you consider that United is not growing by attracting substantially more new customers. At the end of 2021, United had about 26.6 million people enrolled in its commercial, individual, and employer-sponsored health plans. That's just 700,000 more than the 25.9 million the company had 10 years ago. Most of United's membership and revenue growth now comes from the company's Medicare Advantage plans and the state Medicaid programs it manages. In other words, from us as, I hate the word taxpayers, you guys, again, I got to correct it, us as a public. It comes from our public spending. It's not fucking taxpayers. God damn, I'm going to pull my hair out the next time I see a progressive say taxpayers. United and other insurers are padding their top and bottom lines by charging their existing commercial customers higher and higher premiums every year. So the point here, you guys, is that despite a pandemic, despite the situation we're in, health insurance companies, they're not healthcare companies. That's like, that little slip sort of brings up a profound point. They're not engaging in healthcare. That's like saying that Dasani is engaging in water. They're not. They're engaging in plastic bottles, right? Cigna and United Health, they're engaging in a scam to gouge money from people as a middleman that is unnecessary and rapacious, okay? So this just goes to show you how broken our healthcare system is and what the incentives actually produce. Even during a pandemic, we have record profits for health insurance companies while people suffer and while people pay more out of pocket. So good on Wendell Potter. They're shedding some light to that. Shame on United for behaving how they're behaving, price gouging the most desperate people who are struggling, people who are having health problems and financial problems in order to provide dividends and engage in stock buybacks. Shame on you. How disgusting can a human being possibly be? I mean, that makes me want to fucking throw up, you guys. That's disgusting. That makes me want to do violence. You know what I mean? Like, that's just one of those viscerally bothersome how these health insurance companies behave. Good on Wendell Potter also for kind of flipping on that. He eventually realized that what he was participating in was inhumane, indescribably inhumane. So don't ever let people tell you that capitalism is how should I put this? Don't ever let anybody say that a profit incentive in healthcare is a good system. It's very obviously not. There are a lot of industries, you guys, that you just cannot. There's not a profit to be. You want your fire being put out by companies that are competing with each other. When your house sets on fire, you want to have to sit there and go through sales on Google. Which fire department is going to be the cheapest? You know, who has a coupon out today? There are some industries it's just not at all a good idea to allow the market to have anything to do with it. And health insurance, very much one of them. I support an NHS. In lieu of that, I support Medicare for all. And we need to get these companies like United out of the way. That's right there from that article alone, last year alone, $10 billion that would go into sick people's pockets instead of going into these rich 100 millionaire and billionaires' pockets. Okay. So shame on United Health. And, you know, we desperately need Medicare for all. Wanted to talk a little bit. This is in Jacobin, and it's about Nina Turner, who announced that she is once again running against Shontel Brown for Congress in Ohio. Nina obviously was one of Bernie's campaign co-chairs. She is, as far as politicians go, you guys, she's pretty fucking fantastic. I had the pleasure of seeing Nina speak at an office in Las Vegas when I was volunteering for Bernie there. I traveled around the country and volunteered for him in 2020. Nina came by to that office in Vegas to give us a little inspirational speech, and I got to tell you, I would run through a wall for that woman. She can get you pumped up in a way that not many can. I hope that she can find some success. In the last election, Shontel smeared her and lied about her positions, misrepresented her as opposing progressive policy when she obviously is much more progressive than Shontel is. Shontel taking money from nefarious and unsavory industries and then accusing Nina of opposing the very policy that she supports. So that was an unfortunate series of events, and I hope that Nina will find some success this time around. It's worth noting that because last time was a special election, Marcia Fudge was appointed to HUD in the Biden administration. So because that was an appointment and it happened midterm, the last election was a special election, which means the seat is up again this year. So Nina only has to wait a year to run again. So this will be again a primary this spring, and then a November election in 2022. This again is Jacobin. Nina Turner is coming out swinging again. This week, Nina Turner announced a second run for Congress in Ohio's 11th district. She spoke with Jacobin about fighting pro-corporate Democrats, frustrations with the Biden administration, and why evil never sleeps, so good can never take a vacation. Few faces and voices on the campaign trail with Senator Bernie Sanders were as memorable as Nina Turner's. She was one of Sanders' most visible surrogates, served as a 2020 campaign co-chair, and was a frequent speaker at Bernie events. The former Ohio State Senator has now announced a run for Congress in Ohio's 11th district. It's Turner's second run for the seat, having lost to Shontel Brown in an August 2021 special election. Establishment prevails, Politico wrote in its headline covering the outcome. Turner spoke with Jacobin deputy editor Micah Utrick about her race, the state of the Democratic Party and the Joe Biden administration, the need to avoid political despair, and why progressive politicians have to take their ideas to the people. The conversation has been edited for length and clarity. You can also watch the interview at our YouTube channel here. I'm not going to go into the entire transcript there, you guys, but if you're interested, you can find it on Jacobin. Nina Turner, as I mentioned earlier, I'm pretty clear that you know, electoral politics is one of the many tools in our toolkit, you guys. It should not be the only priority. We need to work on the things that I was just spent a while covering: labor issues, strikes, and unionization and all that. We need to work on protests and demonstrations that put our message to the forefront. We need independent media. Like, there's an entire sort of ecosystem of infrastructure that the left needs to build in order to achieve what we want. One of the tools is electoral politics. And if we can elect a Nina Turner instead of a Shontel Brown, we're better off for it. So I want to encourage you all to support Nina. If you happen to be in Ohio, maybe get involved in her campaign. And, hopefully we can, pull things to the left in as many ways as possible, in as many areas as possible. Again, you guys, I'm a kitchen sink guy. If you can move some aspect of our institutions to the left, I encourage it. So Nina Turner certainly would be a move to the left from Shontel Brown. I'm encouraged to see her running again. She is what I like about Nina, you guys, more so that, like, why I would be more encouraged by her than a lot of like the squad members or the current progressives, is that Nina is a little bit more outspoken and a little bit less she seems to me, I should say, a little bit less compelled by the civility arguments that are used to snuff out aggressive action and messaging. She seems a little bit less compelled to sort of fall in line with the way that the Democratic Party wants her to talk about these things. When Bernie was on the campaign, she was far and away the most aggressive interview. I covered a number of clips of her talking to cable news and kind of taking them to fucking task, you guys, in a way that a lot of other surrogates for various candidates won't do, even for like Bernie's. So Nina's she's very outspoken. She, like they said, she comes out swinging. I think the left needs some of that. So regardless of how disheartened you might be about electoral politics in general, to whatever extent it is a tool, I think we should fight for candidates like Nina. And I hope that she can find success against Shontel. I hope Shontel cannot engage in the same kind of corruption and just distasteful campaigning that she engaged in last time. So, and with that, you guys, that is the show for today. I want to encourage everybody to go to realprogressives.org. You can go to realprogressives.org/donate if you want to help us out. Check out all of our articles and content there, our podcasts from the Macro and Cheese podcast that our founder and CEO Steve Grumbine does on Saturdays, to the Up and Up with Jody Newell, a show focused on activism. We have MMT Mondays with our co-editor-in-chief Jabari Morris talking about economics. That drops on Mondays. Don't miss tomorrow's episode on the Real Progressives YouTube channel. And you can obviously catch me every Sunday, the new time for the show, if you guys haven't caught on these last couple of weeks. is 5 Eastern, 2 Pacific. That will be a regular thing going forward. You can always catch me live here. We also post clips throughout the week of individual segments and interviews. If you're interested, that will be on the Real Progress in Action YouTube channel. Encourage you guys to subscribe to both of our YouTube channels. Hit that like button, leave a comment. It helps us with the algorithm. Share with your friends, share on social media, wherever you can put the word out. We very much appreciate it. Also, just wanted to mention that we have merchandise on our site, you guys. So if you want to rock some Real Progressives wear, go to our website and you can purchase some RP swag. We'd like to see our name out there, right? So just however you guys can get involved and help us out, we really appreciate it. We are a nonprofit. And with that, I will say have a wonderful week, and I hope that you all will tune in once again next Sunday.